Will you do it? She asked. The fact that she could even ask that question was more of a shock than seeing the ring held out to her this morning. What? It's a difficult choice, I know, her father said. We'll support you either way. She looked at them as if she had never truly seen them before that moment. How could her parents know her so little that they would think she'd become a Scythe's apprentice? She didn't even know what to say to them. Would you want me to? She found herself terrified of their answer. We want what you want, honey, her mother said, but look at it in perspective. A Scythe wants for nothing in this world. All of your needs and desires would be met, and you'd never have to fear being gleaned. And then something occurred to Citra. You'd never have to worry about being gleaned either. A Scythe's family is immune from gleaning for as long as that Scythe's alive. Her father shook his head. It's not about our immunity. And then she realized that he was telling the truth. It's not about yours. It's about Ben's, Citra said. To that, they didn't have an answer. The memory of Scythe Faraday's unexpected intrusion into their home was still a dark specter haunting them. At the time, they hadn't known why he was there. He could very well have been there to glean Citra or Ben, but if Citra became a Scythe, they never needed to fear an unexpected visitor again. You want me to spend my life killing people? Her mother looked away. Please, Citra, it's not killing, it's gleaning. It's important, it's necessary. Sure, nobody likes it, but everyone agrees it has to happen, and that someone has to do it. Why not you? Citra went to bed early that night before supper because her appetite was a casualty of the day. Her parents came to her door several times, but she told them to go away. She had never been sure what path her life would take. She assumed she would go to college, get a degree in something pleasant, then settle into a comfortable job, meet a comfortable guy, and have a nice, unremarkable life. It's not that she longed for such an existence, but it was expected. Not just for her, but of everyone. With nothing to really aspire to, life had become about maintenance. Eternal maintenance. Could she possibly find greater purpose in the cleaning of human life? The answer was still a resolute no. But if that were the case, then why did she find it hard to sleep? For Rowan, the decision wasn't quite so difficult. Yes, he had hated the thought of being a Scythe. It sickened him. But what sickened him more was the thought of just about anyone else he knew doing it. He didn't see himself as morally superior to anyone, but he did have a keener sense of empathy. He felt for people, sometimes more than he felt for himself. It's what drove him to Cole's gleaning. It's what brought him to Tiger's side each and every time he splat. And Rowan already knew what it was like to be a Scythe, to be treated separate and apart from the rest of the world. He was living that now, but could he bear to live it forever? Maybe he wouldn't have to. Scythes got together, didn't they? They have conclaves 3 times a year and must befriend one another. It was the world's most elite club. No, he didn't want to be part of it, but he had been called to it. It would be a burden, but also the ultimate honor. He didn't tell his family that day because he didn't want them to sway his decision. Immunity? For all of them? Of course they didn't want him to accept. He was loved, but only as one among a group of other beloved things. If his sacrifice could save the rest, the greater familial good would be served. In the end, it was the art that did it. The canvases haunted his dream at night. What must life have been like in the age of mortality? Full of passions, both good and bad, fear giving rise to faith, despair giving meaning to elation. They say even the winters were colder, and the summers were warmer in those days. To live between the prospects of an unknown eternal sky and a dark enveloping the earth must have been glorious. For how else could it have been given rise to such magnificent expression? No one created anything of value anymore, but if by gleaning he could bring back a hint of what it once was, it might be worth it. Could he find it in himself to kill another human being? Not just one, but many, day after day, year after year, until he reached his own eternity. Scythe Faraday believed he could. The following morning, before he left for school, he told his mother that a Scythe had invited him to become an apprentice, and that he'd be dropping out of school to accept the position. If you think that's best, she said. Journal entry. I had my cultural audit today. It happens only once a year, but it is never any less stressful. This year, when they crunched each cultural index from those I gleaned over the past 12 months, I thankfully came up well with my accepted parameters. 20% Caucasoid, 18% Afric, 20% Pan-Asian, 19% Moso Latino, 23% other. Sometimes it's hard to know a person's index. Sometimes it's hard to know. A person's index is considered private, so we can only go by visible traits, which are no longer as obvious as they've been in the past generations. When Scythe's numbers became lopsided, they're disciplined by the high blade and are assigned their gleanings for the next year rather than being allowed to choose for themselves. It is a sign of shame. The index is supposed to keep the world free from cultural and genetic bias, but aren't there already underlying factors that we can't escape? For instance, who decided the first number of one's genetic index would be Caucasoid? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Already underlying factors that we can't escape? For instance, who decided the first number of one's genetic index would be Caucasoid? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 4. Learner's Permit to Kill. Forget what you think you know about Scythes. Leave behind your preconceived notion. Your education begins today. Citra could not believe she was actually going through with this. What secret, self-destructive part of herself had asserted its will over her? What had possessed her to accept the apprenticeship? Now there was no backing out. Yesterday, on the 3rd day of the new year, Scythe Faraday had come to her apartment and had given a year's immunity to her father and brother. He added several months to her mother's, so their immunity would all expire at the same time. Of course, if Citra was chosen to be a full Scythe, their immunity would become permanent. Her parents were tearful when she left. Citra wondered whether the tears of sorrow, joy, relief, perhaps a combination of all three. We know you'll do great things in this world, her father had said, and she wondered what about bringing death could be considered great. Do not be so arrogant as to think you have a license to glean. The license is mine and mine alone. At most, you have, shall we say, a learner's permit. I will, however, require at least one of you to be present at each of my gleanings, and if I ask you to assist, you will. Citra unceremoniously withdrew from school and said goodbye to friends and awkward little conversations. It's not like I won't be around, I just won't be at school anymore. But who was she kidding? Accepting this apprenticeship put her outside of the impenetrable wall. It was both demoralizing yet heartening to know that life would go on without her. And it occurred to her that being a Scythe was like being like a living dead. In the world, but apart from it, just a witness to the coming and goings of others. We are above the law, but that does not mean we live in defiance of it. Our position demands a level of morality beyond the rule of law. We must strive for incorruptibility and must assess our motives on a daily basis. While she did not wear a ring, Citra was given an armband to identify her as a Scythe apprentice. Rowan had one too. Bright green bands bearing the curved blade of the farmer's scythe above an unblinking eye, the double symbol of the Scythehood. The symbol would become a tattoo on the arm of the chosen apprentice. Not that anyone will ever see the tattoo, for Scythes are never seen in public without their robes. Citra had to tell herself that there was an out. She could fail to perform. She could be a lousy apprentice. She could sabotage herself so completely that Honorable Scythe Faraday would be forced to choose Rowan and return her to her family at the end of the year. The problem was that Citra was very bad at doing things half-assed. It would be much harder for her to fail than to succeed. I will not tolerate any romantic notions between the two of you, so banish the thoughts from your mind now. Citra had looked over at Rowan when the Scythe said that, and Rowan had shrugged. Not a problem, he said. Which irritated Citra. At the very least, he could have voiced some minor disappointment. Yeah, Citra said. No hope with that, with or without the rule. Rowan had just grinned at that, which made her even more annoyed. You shall study history, the great philosophers, the sciences. You will come to understand the nature of life and what it means to be human before you are permanently charged with taking of life. You will also study all forms of killcraft and become experts. Like Citra, Rowan found himself unsettled by his decision to take this on, but he was not going to show it. Especially not to Citra. And in spite of the blasé attitude he showed her, he was in fact attracted to her. But he knew even before the Scythe forbade them from such a pursuit, he knew it could not end well. They were adversaries after all. Like Citra, Rowan had stood beside Scythe Faraday as the man held out his ring to each member of his family, offering them immunity. His brothers, sisters, half-siblings, grandma, and her all-too-perfect husband, who Rowan suspected might actually be a bot. Each in turn knelt respectfully and kissed the ring, transmitting their DNA to the worldwide immunity database in the Scythedom's own special cloud, separate and apart from the Thunderhead. The rule was that all members of an apprentice's household would receive immunity for 1 year, and there were 19 people in Rowan's sprawling household. His mother had mixed feelings, because now no one would move out for at least a year to make sure their immunity would become permanent once Rowan received his Scythe's ring, if he got the ring. The only glitch had been when the ring vibrated, giving off a little alarm, refusing immunity to his grandmother's new husband, because he was indeed a bot after all. You shall live as I do, modestly and subsisting on the goodwill of others. You will take no more than you need, and waste nothing. People will attempt to buy your friendship. They will lavish things upon you, accept nothing but the barest of human necessities. Faraday had brought Rowan and Citra to his home to begin their new lives. It was a small bungalow in a rundown part of the city that Rowan hadn't even known existed. People playing at poverty, he had told them, because no one was impoverished anymore. Austerity was a choice, for there was always those who shunned the plenty of the post-mortal world. Faraday's home was Spartan, little decoration, unimpressive furniture. Rowan's room had space for only a bed and a small dresser. Citra at least had a window, but the view was of a brick wall. I will not tolerate childish pastimes or vapid communications with friends. Commitment to this life means leaving behind your old life as fully as possible. When a year from now I choose between you, the unchosen one can return to his or her former life easily enough. But for now, consider that life a part of your past. Once they were settled in, he didn't allow them to brood over their circumstances. As soon as Rowan had unpacked his bags, the Scythe announced that they were going to go to the market. To glean? Rowan asked, more than a little sick in the prospect. No, to get food for the two of you, Faraday told them, unless you prefer to eat my leftovers. Citra smirked at Rowan for asking, as if she hadn't been worrying about that herself. I liked you a lot more before I knew you, he told her. You still don't know me, she answered, which was true. Then she sighed. For the first time since their night at the opera, she offered up something more than attitude. We're being forced to live together, and forced to compete at something neither of us wants to compete over. I know it's not your fault, but it doesn't exactly put us in a friendly place. I know, Rowan admitted. After all, Citra didn't own all the tension between them, but that still doesn't mean we can't have each other's backs. She didn't answer him. He didn't expect her to. It was just a seed he wanted to plant. Over the past 2 months, he had learned that no one had his back anymore. Perhaps no one ever did. His friends had pulled away. He was a footnote in his own family. There was only one person now who shared his plight. That was Citra. If they couldn't find a way to trust each other, then what did they have beyond their learner's permit to kill? Journal entry. The greatest achievement of the human race was not conquering death. It was ending government. Back in the days when the world's digital network was called the cloud, people thought giving too much power to an artificial intelligence would be a very bad idea. Cautionary tales abounded in every form of media. The machines were always the enemy. But then the cloud evolved into the Thunderhead, sparking with consciousness, or at least a remarkable facsimile. In stark contrast to the people's fears, the Thunderhead did not seize power. Instead, it was the people who came to realize that it was far better suited to run things than politicians. In those days before the Thunderhead, human arrogance, self-interest, and endless infighting determined the rule of law. Inefficient, imperfect, vulnerable to all forms of corruption. But the Thunderhead was incorruptible. Not only that, but its algorithms were built on the full sum of human knowledge. All the time and money wasted on political posturing, the lives lost in wars, the populations abused by despots, all gone the moment the Thunderhead was handed power. Of course, the politicians, dictators, and warmongers weren't happy, but their voices, which had always seemed so loud and intimidating, were suddenly insignificant. The Emperor not only had no clothes, turns out he had no testicles either. The Thunderhead quite literally knew everything. When and where to build roads, how to eliminate waste and food distribution and thus end hunger, how to protect the environment from the ever-growing human population. It created jobs, it clothed the poor, it established the world code. Now, for the first time in history, law was no longer the shadow of justice. It was justice. The Thunderhead gave us a perfect world. The utopia that our ancestors could only dream of is our reality. There was only one thing the Thunderhead was not given authority over: the Scythedom. When it was decided that people needed to die in order to ease the tide of population growth, it was also decided that this must be the responsibility of humans. Bridge repair and urban planning could be handed over to the Thunderhead. But taking a life was an act of conscience and consciousness. Since it could not be proven that the Thunderhead had either, the Scythedom was born. I do not regret the decision, but I often wonder if the Thunderhead would have done a better job. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 5. But I'm only 96. While a trip to the market should be an ordinary, everyday occurrence, Citra found that food shopping with a Scythe carried its own basket of crazy. The moment the market doors parted for them and all 3 of them stepped in, the dread around them was enough to raise gooseflesh on Citra's arms. Nothing so blatant as gasps or screams. People were used to Scythe passing through their everyday lives. It was silent, but pervasive, as if it had just accidentally strolled onto some theatrical stage and fouled the performance. Citra noticed that, in general, there were 3 types of people. 1. The deniers. These were the people who forged on and pretended the Scythe wasn't there. It wasn't just a matter of ignoring him, it was actively, willfully denying his presence. It reminded Citra of the way very small children would play hide and seek, covering their own eyes to hide, thinking that if they couldn't see you, then you couldn't see them. 2. The escape artists. These were the people who ran away but tried to make it look as if they weren't. They suddenly remembered they forgot to get eggs, or began chasing after a running child that didn't actually exist. One shopper abandoned a cart mumbling about a wallet he must have left at home, despite an obvious bulge in his back pocket. He hurried out and didn't come back. 3. The Scythe's pets. These were the people who went out of their way to engage the Scythe and offer him something, with the secret, not so secret, hope that he might grant them immunity, or at least glean the person to the right instead of them someday. Here, Your Honor, take my melon. It's bigger, I insist. Did these people know that such psychophantic behavior would make a Scythe want to glean them even more? Not that Citra would want to level a death penalty for such a thing, but if she were given a choice between some innocent bystander and someone who was being nauseatingly obsequious about their produce, she'd choose the melon giver. There was one shopper who didn't seem to fit the other 3 profiles, a woman who actually seemed pleased to see him. Good morning, Scythe Faraday, she said as they passed her near the deli counter, then looked at Citra and Rowan, curious. Your niece and nephew? Hardly, he said, with a bit of disdain in his voice relative Citra had no interest in knowing. I've taken apprentices. Her eyes widened a bit. Such a thing, she said in a way that made it unclear whether she thought it was a good or a bad idea. Do they have a penchant for the work? Not the slightest. She nodded. Well then, I guess it's all right. You know what they say. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. The Scythe smiled. I hope I can induce him to your strudel sometime. She nodded at the 2 of them. Well, that goes without saying. After she moved on, Scythe Faraday explained that she was a long-time friend. She cooked for me from time to time, and she works in the coroner's office. In my line of work, it's always good to have a friend there. Do you grant her immunity? Citra asked. Rowan thought the Scythe might be indignant at the question, but instead he answered. The Scythedom frowns upon those who play favorites, but I found I can grant her immunity on alternate years without raising a red flag. What if another Scythe gleans her during the off years? Then I shall attend her funeral with heartfelt grief, he told them. As they shopped, Citra chose some snacks at the Scythe, eyed dubiously. Are these really necessary? He asked. Is anything really necessary? Citra responded. Rowan found it amusing how Citra gave the Scythe attitude, but it worked. He let her keep the chips. Rowan tried to be more practical, picking out the staples like eggs, flour, and various protein and side dishes to go with them. Don't get the chicken tenders, Citra said, looking at his choices. Trust me, my mother's a food synthesis engineer. That stuff's not actual chicken. They grow it in a petri dish. Rowan held up another bag of frozen protein. How about this? Sea steak? Sure, if you like plankton pressed into meat shapes. Well then, maybe you should pick your own meals instead of grabbing sweets and snacks. Are you always this boring, she asked. Didn't he say we have to live as he lives? I don't think cookie dough ice cream is part of his lifestyle. She sneered at him, but switched out the flavor for vanilla. As they continued to shop, it was Citra who first noticed the two suspicious-looking teens who seemed to be tracking them throughout the store, lingering behind them, trying to look as if they were just shopping. They were probably unsavories, people who found enjoyment in activities that bordered on the fringe of the law. Sometimes unsavories actually broke the law in minor ways, although most lost interest eventually because they were always caught by the thunderhead and reprimanded by peace officers. The more troublesome offenders were tweaked with shotgun knives in their blood, just powerful enough to deter any scoffing at the law. And if that didn't work, you got your own personal peace officer, 24/7. Citra had an uncle like that. He called his officer his guardian angel, and eventually married her. She tugged on Rowan's sleeve, bringing the unsavory to his attention, but not Scythe Faraday's. Why do you think they're following us? They probably think there's going to be gleaning, and they want to watch, suggested her. Need to shop, it was six caught by the thunderhead and reprimanded by peace officers. The more troublesome offenders were tweaked with shotgun knives in their blood, just powerful enough to deter any scoffing at the law. And if that didn't work, you got your own personal peace officer, 24/7. Citra had an uncle like that. He called his officer his guardian angel, and eventually married her. She tugged on Rowan's sleeve, bringing the unsavories to his attention, but not Scythe Faraday's. Why do you think they're following us? They probably think there's going to be gleaning, and they want to watch, suggested Rowan. Which seemed like a likely theory. As it turned out, however, they had other motives. As the three of them waited in the checkout line, one of the unsavories grabbed Scythe Faraday's hand and kissed his ring before he could stop him. The ring began to glow red, indicating his immunity. Ha! Said the unsavory, puffing up his strategic triumph. I've got immunity for a year, and you can't undo it. I know the rules. Scythe Faraday was unfazed. Yes, good for you, he said. You have 365 days of immunity, and then looking him in the eye said, and I'll be seeing you on day 366. Suddenly the teen's smug expression dropped as if all the muscles that held up his face failed. He stuttered a bit, and his friend pulled him away. They ran out of the store as fast as they could. Well played, said another man in line. He offered to pay for the Scythe groceries, which was pointless, because Scythe always got their grocery for free anyway. Will you really track him down a year from now? Rowan asked. The Scythe grabbed a roll of breath mints from the rack. Not worth my time. Besides, I've already made it out as punishment. He'll be worried about being gleaned all year. A lesson for both of you. A Scythe doesn't have to follow through on a threat for it to be effective. Then a few minutes later, as they were loading the grocery bags into a public car, the Scythe looked across the parking lot. There, he said. You see that woman? The one who just dropped her purse? Yeah, said Rowan. Scythe Faraday pulled out his phone, aimed the camera at the woman, and in an instant, information about her began to scroll on the screen. Naturally, 96 years of age, physically 34, mother of 9, data management technician for a small shipping company. She's off to work after she puts away her groceries, the Scythe told him. This afternoon, we will go to her place of business and glean her. Citra drew in an audible breath, not quite a gasp, but close. Rowan focused on his own breathing so he didn't telegraph his emotions the way Citra had. Why? He asked. Why her? The Scythe gave him a cool look. Why not her? You had a reason for gleaning Cole Whitlock. Who? Citra asked. A kid I knew at school when I first met our honorable Scythe here. Faraday sighed. Fatalities in parking lots made up 1.25% of all accidental deaths during the last days of age of mortality. Last night, I decided I would choose today's subject from a parking lot. So all this time while we were shopping, you knew it would end with this? Rowan said. I feel bad for you, said Citra. Even when you're food shopping, death is hiding right behind the milk. It never hides, the Scythe told him, with a world weariness that was hard to describe, nor does it sleep. You'll learn that soon enough. But it wasn't something either of them was eager to learn. That afternoon, just as the Scythe had said, they went to the shipping company where the woman worked, and they watched, just as Rowan had watched Cole's gleaning. But today, it was a little more than mere observation. I have chosen for you a life-terminating pill, Scythe Faraday told the speechless, tremulous woman. He reached into his robe and produced a small pill in a little glass vial. It will not activate until you bite it, so you can choose the moment. You need not swallow it, just bite it. Death will be instantaneous and painless. Her head shook like a bobblehead doll. May I call my children? Scythe Faraday sadly shook his head. No, I'm sorry, but we shall pass on any message you have to them. What would it hurt to allow her to say goodbye? Citra asked. He put up his hand to silence her and handed the woman a pen and a piece of paper. Say all you need to say in a letter. I promise we shall deliver it. They waited outside of her office. Scythe Faraday seemed to have infinite patience. What if she opens a window and decides to splat? Rowan asked. Then her life will end on schedule. It would be a more unpleasant choice, but the ultimate result is the same. The woman didn't choose to splat. Instead, she let them back into the room, but lightly handed the envelope to Scythe Faraday and sat down at her desk. I'm ready. Then Scythe Faraday did something they didn't expect. He turned to Rowan and handed him the vial. Please, place the pill in Miss Becker's mouth. Who? Me? Scythe Faraday didn't answer. He simply held the vial out, waiting for Rowan to take it. Rowan knew he wasn't officially performing the gleaning, but to be an intermediary, the thought was debilitating. He swallowed, tasting bitterness as if the pill were in his own mouth. He refused to take it. Scythe Faraday gave him a moment more, then turned to Citra. You then? Citra just shook her head. Scythe Faraday smiled. Very good, he told them. I was testing you. I would not have been pleased if either of you were so eager to administer death. At the word death, the woman took a shuddering breath. Scythe Faraday opened the vial and carefully removed the pill. It was triangular, with a dark green coating. Who knew death could arrive so small? But I'm only 96, the woman said. We know, the Scythe told her. Now please, open your mouth. Remember, it's not to swallow, you must bite it. She opened her mouth as she was told, and Scythe Faraday placed the pill on her tongue. She then closed her mouth, but didn't bite it right away. She looked at each of them in turn, Rowan, then Citra, then finally settled her gaze on Scythe Faraday. Then, the slightest crunch, and she went limp. Simple as that, but not so simple at all. Citra's eyes were moist. She pressed her lips together. As much as Rowan tried to control his emotions, his breath came out uneasily, and he felt lightheaded. And then Scythe Faraday turned to Citra. Check for a pulse, please. Who, me? The Scythe was patient. He didn't ask again. The man never asked a thing twice. When she continued to hesitate, he finally said, This time, it's not a test. I actually want you to confirm for me that she has no pulse. Citra reached up her hand to the woman's neck. Other side, the Scythe told her. She pressed her finger to the woman's carotid artery, just beneath her ear. No pulse. Satisfied, Scythe Faraday stood. So that's it? Citra asked. What were you expecting? Said Rowan. A chorus of angels? Citra threw him a half-hearted glare. But I mean, it's so uneventful. Rowan knew what she meant. Rowan had experienced the electric jolt that had taken a schoolmate's life. It was awful, but somehow this was worse. What now? Do we just leave her like this? Best not to linger, Scythe Faraday said, tapping something out on his phone. I've notified the coroner to come collect Mr. Becker's body. Then he took the letter she had written and slipped it into one of the many pockets of his robe. You two shall present this letter to her family at the funeral. Wait, Citra said. We're going to her funeral? I thought you said it was best not to linger, said Rowan. Lingering and paying respects are two different things. I attend the funerals of all the people I glean. Is that a Scythe rule? Rowan asked, having never been to a funeral. No, it's my rule, he told them. It's called common decency. Then they left, Rowan and Citra both avoiding eye contact with the dead woman's co-workers. This, both of them realized, was their first initiation rite. This was the moment their apprenticeship had truly begun. Hey friends, narrator here. That wraps up part 1 of Scythe by Neal Shusterman. The series will continue, but if you have anything, please let me know in the comments below of anything I should do or add or change, and hopefully we can keep this going. Thanks for watching. Bye. Scythe by Neal Shusterman. Part 2. No laws beyond these. The Scythe Commandments. 1. Thou shalt kill. 2. Thou shalt kill with no bias, bigotry, or malice aforethought. 3. Thou shalt grant an annum of immunity to the beloved of those who accept your coming, and to anyone else you deem worthy. 4. Thou shalt kill the beloved of those who resist. 5. Thou shalt serve humanity for the full span of thy days, and thy family shall have immunity as recompense for as long as you live. 6. Thou shalt lead an exemplary life in word and deed, and keep a journal of each and every day. 7. Thou shalt kill no scythe beyond thyself. 8. Thou shalt claim no earthly possessions save thy robes, ring, and journal. 9. Thou shalt have neither spouse nor spawn. 10. Thou shalt be beholden to no laws beyond these. Once a year I fast and ponder the commandments. In truth, I ponder them daily, but once a year I allow them to be my sole sustenance. There is genius in their simplicity. Before the Thunderhead, governments had constitutions and massive tomes of law, yet even then they were forever debated and challenged and manipulated. Wars were fought over the different interpretations of the same doctrine. When I was much more naive, I thought that the simplicity of the Scythe commandments made them impervious to scrutiny. From whatever angle you approach them, they look the same. Over my many years, I've been both bemused and horrified by how malleable and elastic they can be. The things we Scythe attempt to justify, the things that we excuse. In my early days, there were several Scythes still alive who were present when the commandments were formed. Now, none remain, all having invoked commandment number 7. I wish I would have asked them how the commandments came about, what led to each one. How did they decide upon the wording? Were there any that were jettisoned before the final 10 were written in stone? And journal. 9. Thou shalt have neither spouse nor spawn. 10. Thou shalt kill no scythe beyond thyself. 8. Thou shalt claim no earthly possessions save thy robes, ring, and journal. And why number 10? Of all the commandments, number 10 gives me the greatest pause for thought. For to put oneself above all other laws is a fundamental recipe for disaster. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 6. An Elegy of Scythes. The flight was on time, as usual. While weather couldn't entirely be controlled, it was easily diverted away from airports and out-of-flight paths. Most airlines boasted 99.9% on-time service. It was a full flight, but with the lavishly appointed seats of modern air travel, it didn't feel crowded at all. These days, flying was as comfortable as sitting in one's own living room, with the added perk of live entertainment. String quartets and vocal stylists soared across the skies with a cabin full of contented passengers. Air travel these days was far more civilized than the age of mortality. It was now an exceptionally pleasant way to reach one's destination. Today, however, the passengers of Big Sky Air Flight 922 were on their way to a different destination than the one they had planned. The businessman was seated comfortably in seat 15C, an aisle seat. He always requested that seat, not out of superstition, but out of habit. When he didn't get 15C, he was cranky and resentful of whoever did. The company he ran, which was developing hibernation technology, would someday make the longest journey seem to pass in a matter of minutes. But for now, he'd be happy with Big Sky Air, as long as he got seat 15C. People were still filing on, taking their seats. He eyed the passengers moving down the aisle with mildest interest, but only to make sure they didn't hit his shoulder, or carries on as they passed. Are you heading out or heading home? Asked the woman sitting beside him on 15A. There was no 15B. The concept of the B seat, where one had to sit between two passengers, had been eliminated along with the other unpleasant things, like disease and government. Out, he told her. And you? Home, she said with a heavy but relieved sigh. At 5 minutes to departure, a commotion up front caught his attention. His scythe had entered the plane and was talking to a flight attendant. When a scythe wants to travel, any seat is fair game. The scythe could displace a passenger, forcing them to take a different seat, or even a different flight if there were no other available seats. More unnerving, however, were tales of scythe who gleaned the passengers from the seat they took. The businessman could only hope that this particular scythe didn't have his sights set on 15C. The scythe's robe was unusual, royal blue, speckled with glittering jewels that appeared to be diamonds. Rather ostentatious for a scythe. The businessman didn't know what to make of it. The age the scythe presented was late 30s, although that meant nothing. No one looked their true age anymore. He could have been anywhere from 30-something to 230-something. His hair was dark and well-groomed. His eyes were invasive. The businessman tried not to catch his gaze as the scythe looked down the aisle into the cabin. Then 3 more scythes appeared behind the first. They were younger, perhaps in their early 20s. The robes, each a different bright color, were also decorated with gems. There was a dark-haired woman in apple green, sparkled with emeralds, a man in orange, speckled with rubies, and another man in yellow, speckled with golden citrines. What was the collective word for a group of scythe? An elegy, wasn't it? Odd that there'd be a word for something so rare. In his experience, the scythes were always solitary, never traveling together. A flight attendant greeted the elegy of scythes, and the second they were past her, she turned, left the plane, and ran down the jetway. She's escaping, thought the businessman. But then he banished the thought. She couldn't be. She was probably just hurrying to let the gate agent know of the added passengers. That's all. She couldn't be panicking. Flight attendants were trained not to panic. But then, the remaining flight attendant closed the door, and the look on her face was anything but reassuring. The passengers began talking to one another, mumbling, a little bit of nervous laughter. Then the lead scythe addressed the passengers. Your attention, please, he said with an unnerving smile. I regret to inform you that this entire flight has been selected for gleaning. The businessman heard it, but his brain told him that he could not have possibly heard correctly. Or maybe this was Scythe's humor, if such a thing existed. The entire flight has been selected for gleaning? This couldn't be possible. It couldn't be allowed. Could it? In a few moments, the passengers began to wrap their minds around what the scythe had said. Then came the gasps, the wails, the whimpers, and finally uncontrolled sobs. The misery could not have been worse had they lost an engine in flight, as planes did back in the mortal days when technology occasionally failed. But the businessman was quick. The businessman was a quick study and excelled at split-second decisions in crisis. He knew what he had to do. Perhaps others were thinking the same thing, but he was the one who took action first. He left his seat and hurled himself down the aisle toward the back of the plane. Others followed him, but he was the first to the back door. He quickly scanned its operation, then pulled the red lever and swung the door open into the bright sunny morning. A jump from the site to the tarmac might have broken a bone or twisted an ankle, but the healing nanites in his blood would quickly release opiates and deaden the pain. He'd be able to escape in spite of any injury, but before he could leap, he heard the lead scythe say, "I suggest you all return to your seats if you value the lives of your loved ones." It was standard procedure for scythes to glean families of those who resist or run from being gleaned. Familial gleaning was a remarkable deterrent, but this was a full plane. If he jumped and ran, how would they know who he was? As if reading his mind, the lead scythe said, "We have a manifest from this plane. We know the names of everyone on board, including the name of the flight attendant who displayed cowardice unbecoming to her position and left. Her entire family will pay the price along with her." The businessman slid down to his knees and put his head in his hands. A man behind him pushed past him and jumped anyway. He hit the ground and ran, more worried about what was happening in the moment than what might happen tomorrow. Perhaps he had no family he cared about, or perhaps he'd rather they journey with him into oblivion. But as for the businessman, he could not bear the thought of his wife and children gleaned because of him. Gleaning is necessary, he told himself. Everyone knows, everyone has agreed this is a crucial necessity. Who was he to go against it? It only seemed terrible now that he was the one lined up in the cold crosshairs of death. Then the lead scythe raised an arm and pointed at him, his fingernails seemed just the slightest bit too long. "You," he said. "The bold one, come here." Others in the aisle stepped aside and the businessman found himself moving forward. He couldn't even feel his legs doing it. It was as if the scythe was pulling him from an invisible string. His presence was that commanding. "We should glean him first," said the blonde brutish scythe in the bright orange robe, wielding what appeared to be a flamethrower. "Glean him first to set an example." But the lead scythe shook his head. "First of all, put that thing away. We will not play with fire on a plane. Secondly, setting an example presupposes that someone will be left to learn. It's pointless when there's no one to set the example for." He lowered his weapon and looked down. He lowered his weapon and looked down, chastised. The other two scythes remained silent. "You were so quick to leave your seat," the lead scythe said to the businessman. "Clearly you're the alpha of this plane, and as alpha, I will allow you to choose the order in which these good folks shall be gleaned. You can be the last if you choose, but first you must select the order of the others." I... Come now, no indecisiveness. You were decisive enough when you ran to the back of the plane. Bring that formidable will to bear on this moment. Clearly, the scythe was enjoying this. He shouldn't enjoy it. That's one of the basic precepts of scythedom. I should lodge a complaint, which he realized would be very difficult to do if he was dead. He looked at the terrified people around him. Now they were terrified of him. He was the enemy too. "We're waiting," said a woman in green, impatient to begin. "How?" the man asked, trying to control his breathing, stalling for time. "How will you glean us?" The lead scythe pulled back a fold of his robe to display an entire collection of weapons neatly concealed beneath. Knives of various lengths, guns, other objects that the man didn't even recognize. "Our method will be as our mood suits us. Sans incinerating devices, of course. Now please start choosing people so we may begin." The female scythe tightened her grip on the handle of the machete and brushed back her dark hair with her free hand. Did she actually just lick her lips? This would not be a gleaning. It would be a bloodbath, and the businessman realized he wanted no part of it. Yes, his fate was sealed. Nothing could change that, which meant he didn't have to play the scythe twisted game. Suddenly, he found himself sublimating his fear, rising to a place where he could look the scythe in his dark eyes, the same deep shade of blue as his robe. "No," the man said. "I will not choose, and I will not give you the pleasure of watching me squirm." Then he turned to the other passengers. "I advise everyone here to end your own lives before the scythe get their hands on you. They took too much pleasure in it. They don't deserve their rank any more than they deserve the honor of gleaning you." The lead scythe glared at him, but only for a moment. Then he turned to his three compatriots. "Begin!" he ordered. The others drew weapons and began the awful gleaning. "I am your completion," the lead scythe said loudly to the dying. "I am the last word of your lives well lived. Give thanks, and thus farewell." The lead scythe pulled out his own blade, but the businessman was ready. The moment the blade was drawn, he thrust himself forward onto it, a final, willful act, making death his own choice rather than the scythe's. Denying the scythe if not his method, then his madness. Journal entry. In my early years, I wondered why it was so rare to catch a scythe out of his or her robes and in common street clothes. It's a rule in some places, but not in mid-America. Here, it is just an accepted practice, although rarely violated. Then, as I settled in, occurred to me why it must be. It's for our own peace of mind. We scythes must retain a certain level of separation from the rest of humanity. Even in the privacy of my own home, I find myself wearing only the simple lavender frock that I wear beneath my robes. Some would call this behavior aloof. I suppose on some level it is, but for me, it's more the need to remind myself that I am other. Certainly, most uniformed positions allow the wearers to have a separate life. Peace officers and firefighters, for instance, are only partially defined by their job. In the off hours, they wear jeans and t-shirts. They have barbecues for neighbors and coach their children in sports. But to be a scythe means you are a scythe every hour of the day. It defines you to the core of your being, and only in the dreams is one free of the yoke. Yet even in dreams, I often find myself gleaning. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 7. Killcraft. During your year with me, Scythe Faraday told Rowan and Citra, you will learn the proper way to wield various blades, you will become marksmen in more than a dozen types of firearms, you will have a working knowledge of toxicology, and you will train in the deadliest of martial arts. You will not become masters in these things, that takes many years, but will have the basic skills upon which you will build. Skills that will be useless for the one you don't choose, Citra pointed out. Nothing you learn is useless, he told her. While the Scythe's house was modest and unadorned, it had one impressive feature, the weapons den. It had once been the garage of the old house, but now was lined with the Scythe's extensive weapon collection. One wall was hung with blades, another firearms, a third wall looked like a farmer's itself, and the fourth wall held more archaic objects, elaborately carved bows, a quiver of obsidian-tipped arrows, frighteningly muscular crossbows, even a mace. Although it was hard for them to imagine Scythe Faraday taking someone out with a mace. The fourth wall was more of a museum, they supposed, but the fact that they weren't sure was unsettling. The daily regimen was rigorous. Rowan and Citra trained with blades and staffs, sparring against a scythe, who was surprisingly strong and limber for a man of his apparent age. They learned to shoot at a special firing range for scythes and apprentices, where weapons that were banned for public use were not only allowed, but encouraged. They learned the basics of Black Widow Bokator, a deadly version of the ancient Cambodian martial art developed specifically for the scythedom. It left them exhausted, but stronger than either of them had ever been. Physical training, however, was only half the regimen. There was an old oak table in the center of the weapons den, clearly a relic from the Age of Mortality. This is where Scythe Faraday spent several hours a day schooling them in the ways of a scythe, studies of mental acuity, history, and the chemistry of poisons, as well as daily entries in their apprentice journals. There was more to learn about death than either of them had ever considered. History, chemistry, writing. This is like school, Rowan grumbled to Citra, because he wouldn't dare complain to Scythe Faraday. And then there was the gleaning. Each scythe must perform a quota of 260 gleanings per year, Scythe Faraday told him, which averages to 5 per week. So you get weekends off, joked Rowan, trying to add a little nervous levity to the discussion, but Faraday was not amused. For him, nothing about gleaning was a laughing matter. On days that I don't glean, I attend funerals and do research for future gleanings. Scythes, or should I say good scythes, don't often have days off. The idea that not all scythes were good was something neither Rowan or Citra had ever considered. It was widely accepted that scythes adhered to the highest moral and ethical standards. They were wise in their dealings and fair in their choices. Even the ones who sought celebrity were seen to deserve it. The idea that some scythes might not be as honorable as Scythe Faraday did not sit well with either of his new apprentices. The raw shock of gleaning never left Citra. Although Scythe Faraday had not since the first day asked him to be the life-taking hand, being an accomplice was difficult enough. Each untimely end came draped in its own shroud of dread, like a recurring nightmare that never lost its potency. She thought she would grow numb, that she would become used to the work, but it didn't happen. It means I chose wisely, Scythe Faraday told her. If you do not cry yourself to sleep on a regular basis, you are not compassionate enough to be a scythe. She doubted Rowan cried himself to sleep. He was the type of kid who kept his emotions very much to himself. She couldn't read him. He was opaque, and it bothered her. Or perhaps he was so transparent she was seeing through him to the other side. She couldn't be sure. They quickly learned that Scythe Faraday was very creative in his gleaning methods. He never repeated the exact same method twice. But aren't there scythes who are ritualistic in their work? Citra asked him. Performing each gleaning exactly the same? Yes, but we must each find our own way, he told her. Our own code of conduct. I prefer to see each person I glean as an individual deserving of an end that is unique. He outlined for them the 7 basic methods of killcraft. Most common are the 3 Bs, blade, bullet, and blunt force. The next 3 are asphyxiation, poison, and catastrophic induction, such as electrocution or fire, although I find fire horrifically to glean and would never use it. The final method is weaponless force, which is why we train you in Bogator. To be a scythe, he explained, meant that one had to be well-versed in all methods. Citra realized that being well-versed meant she would have to participate in various types of gleaning. Would he have her pull the trigger, thrust the knife, swing the club? She wanted to believe she wasn't capable of it. She desperately wanted to believe that she wasn't scythe material. It was the first time in her life that she aspired to fail. Rowan's feelings on the matters were mixed. He found that Scythe Faraday moral imperative and ethical high ground infused Rowan with purpose. But only in the scythe's presence. When left to his own thoughts, Rowan doubted everything. Burned into his mind was the look on the woman's face as she fearfully, yet obediently opened her mouth to be poisoned. The look on her face the moment before she bit down. The look on her face the moment before she bit down. I am an accomplice to the world's oldest crime, he told himself in his loneliest moments, and it will only get worse. While the journals of the scythes were public record, an apprentice still had the luxury of privacy. Scythe Faraday gave Rowan and Citra pale, leather-bound volumes of rough-edged parchment. To Rowan, it looked like a relic from the Dark Ages. He wouldn't have been surprised if Faraday gave him a feather quill to go with it. Mercifully, however, they were allowed to use normal writing utensils. A scythe's journal is traditionally made of lambskin parchment and kid leather. I assume you mean kid as in goat, Rowan said, and not kid as in kid. That finally made the scythe laugh. Citra seemed to be annoyed that he had made Scythe Faraday laugh, as if it put it a point ahead of her. Rowan knew that as much as she hated the idea of being a scythe, she would jockey for position over him, because that's how she was hardwired. Competition was in her very nature. She couldn't help herself. Rowan was much better at picking his battles. He could compete when necessary, but rarely got caught up in petty one-upsmanship. He wondered if that would give him an advantage over Citra. He wondered if he wanted one. Being a scythe would not have been his life choice. He had not made any life choices yet, so he had no real clue what he would do with his eternal future. But now that he was being mentored by a scythe, he began to feel that he might have some mettle to be one. If Scythe Faraday had selected him as morally capable of the job, perhaps he was. As for the journal, Rowan hated it. In a large family where no one particularly cared to hear his thoughts on anything, he'd become accustomed to keeping his thoughts himself. I don't see what the big deal is, Citra said as they worked on their journals after dinner one evening. No one will ever read it but you. So why write it? Rowan snapped back. Citra sighed as if he was talking to a child. It's to prepare you for an official scythe's journal. Whichever one gets us the ring will be legally obligated by Commandment 6 to keep a journal every day of our lives. Which I'm sure no one will read, added Rowan. But people could read it. The Scythe Archive is open to everyone. Yeah, said Rowan. Like the Thunderhead, people can read anything, but no one does. All they do is play games and watch cat holograms. Citra shrugged. All the more reason not to worry about writing one. If it's lost among a gazillion pages, you can write your grocery list and what you ate for breakfast. No one will care. But Rowan cared. If he was going to put pen to paper, if he was going to do what a scythe does, he would do it right or not at all. And so far, as he looked at his painfully blank page, he was leaning toward not at all. He watched Citra as she wrote, completely absorbed in her journal. From where he sat, he couldn't read what she had written, but he could tell that it was fine penmanship. It figured she would take penmanship in school. It was like one of those classes people just took to be superior, like Latin. He supposed he'd have to learn to write in cursive if he became a scythe, but right now he'd be stuck with inelegant, sloppy printing. He wondered had Citra been in the same school, would they have gotten along? They probably wouldn't have even known each other. She was the type of girl who participates, and Rose the kind of kid who avoids. Their circles were about as far from intersecting as Jupiter and Mars in the night sky. Now, however, they've been pulled into convergence. They were not exactly friends. They were never given the opportunity to develop a friendship before being thrust into apprenticeship together. They were partners. They were adversaries. And Rowan found it increasingly hard to parse his feelings about her. All he knew was that he liked watching her write. Scythe Faraday was strict on his no family policy. It is ill-advised for you to have contact with your family during your apprenticeship. It was difficult for Citra. She missed her parents. But more than that, she missed her brother, Ben, which surprised her. Because at home, she never had much patience for him. Rowan seemed to have no problem with being separated from his family. They'd much rather have an immunity than have me around anyway, he told Citra. Boo-hoo, Citra said. And I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? Not at all. Envious, maybe. It makes it easier for me to leave it all behind. Scythe Faraday did bend his own rule once, however. About a month in, he allowed Citra to attend her aunt's wedding. While everyone else was dressed in gowns and tuxedos, Scythe Faraday did not allow Citra to dress up, lest you feel yourself a part of that world. It worked. Wearing simple street clothes amid a pageantry made her feel even more the outsider, and the apprentice R-band made it worse. Perhaps this was the reason Faraday allowed her to attend, to make crystal clear the distinction between who had been and who she was now. So what's it like? Asked her cousin Amanda. Gleaning and stuff. Is it, like, gross? We're not allowed to talk about it, Citra told her, which was not true, but she had no interest in discussing gleaning like it was school gossip. She should have nurtured that conversation, however, instead of shutting it down, because Amanda was one of the few people who spoke to her. There were plenty of sideways glances and people talking about her when they felt she wasn't watching, but most everyone avoided her like she carried a moral age disease. Perhaps if she already had her ring, they might be trying to curry favor in hopes of receiving immunity, but apparently as an apprentice, she offered them nothing but the creeps. Her brother was standoffish, and even speaking to her mother was awkward. She asked standard questions like, "Are you eating? Are you getting enough to sleep?" "I understand there's a boy living with you," her father said. "He has his own room, and he's not interested in me at all," she told him, which she felt oddly embarrassed to admit. Citra sat through the wedding ceremony, but excused herself before the reception and took a public cart back to the Scythe Faraday's house, unable to bear another minute of it. "You're back early," Scythe Faraday commented when she returned, and although he feigned surprise, he had set her place for dinner. Journal entry. Scythes are supposed to have a keen appreciation of death, yet there are some that are beyond even our comprehension. The woman I gleaned today asked me the oddest question. "Where do I go now?" she asked. "Well," I explained calmly, "your memories and life recording are already stored in the Thunderhead, so it won't be lost. Your body is returned to the earth in a manner determined by your next of kin." "Yes, I know all that," she said, "but what about me?" The question perplexed me. As I said, your memory construct will exist in the Thunderhead. Loved ones will be able to talk to it, and your construct will respond. "Yes," she said, getting a bit agitated, "but what about me?" I gleaned her then. Only after she was gone did I say, "I don't know." From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 8. A Matter of Choice. "I will glean alone today," Scythe Faraday told Rowan and Citra one day in February, the second month of their apprenticeship. "While I'm gone, I have a task for each of you." He took Citra into the weapons den. "You, Citra, shall polish each of my blades." She'd been in the weapons den nearly every day for lessons, but to be there alone, nothing but her and instruments of death, was entirely different. The scythe went to the blade hole, which had everything from swords to switchblades. Some are merely dusty, others tarnished. You shall decide what type of care each one needs. She watched the way his eyes moved from one blade to another, lingering long enough, perhaps, to recall a memory. "You've used them all?" she asked. "Only about half of them, and even then for only one gleaning." He reached up and pulled a rapier from the fourth wall, the one with the older-looking weapons. This one looked like the kind of one the Three Musketeers might have used. When I was young, I had much more of a flair for drama. I wanted to glean a man who fancied himself a fencer, so I challenged him to a duel. "And you won?" "No, I lost. Twice. He skewered me through the neck the first time, and tore over my femoral artery the second. He was very good. Each time after I woke up in the revival center, I returned to challenge him. His wins bought him time, but he was chosen to be gleaned, and I would not relent. Some scythes will change their minds, but that leads to compromise, and it favors the persuasive. I make my decisions firm." In the fourth bout, I pierced his heart with the tip of my blade. As he breathed his last breath, he thanked me for allowing him to die fighting. It was the only time in all my years as a scythe that I had been thanked for what I do. He sighed and put the rapier back in what Citra realized was a place of honor. "If you have all these weapons, why did you take our knife that day you came to glean my neighbor?" Citra had to ask. The scythe grinned, to gauge her reaction. "I threw it away," she told him. "I suspected as much," he said, "but these you will polish." Then he left her there. When he was gone, Citra studied the weapons. She was not particularly morbid, but she found herself wanting to know which blades had been used, and how. It seemed to her that a noble weapon deserved to have its story passed down, and if not to her and Rowan, then who? She pulled a scimitar from the wall, a heavy beast that could decapitate you with a single swing. Had Scythe Faraday used it for a beheading? It was, in a way, his style. Swift, painless, efficient. As she moved it clumsily through the air, she wondered if she had strength to behead someone. My God, what am I becoming? She put the weapon on the table, grabbed the rag, and rubbed polish on it. And when she finished, she went to the next, and the next, trying not to see a reflection in each of the gleaming blades. Rowan's task was not as visceral, but was even more troubling. "Today you shall lay the groundwork for my next gleaning," Scythe Faraday told him, then gave him a list of parameters that tomorrow's subject should have. "All the information you need is in the Thunderhead, if you're clever enough to find it." Then he left for the day's gleaning. Rowan almost made the mistake of giving the list of parameters to the Thunderhead and asking it for a subject, until he remembered that asking the Thunderhead for assistance was strictly forbidden for scythes. They had full access to the Great Cloud's wealth of information, but could not access its algorithmic conscious mind. South Faraday had told him of a scythe who tried to do so. The Thunderhead itself reported him to the High Blade, and he was severely disciplined. "How is a scythe disciplined?" Rowan asked. "He was put to death 12-fold by a jury of scythes, then revived each time. After the 12th revival, he was on probation for a year." Rowan imagined a jury of scythes would be very creative in their methods of punishment. He suspected that dying 12 times at the hand of a scythe would be a lot worse than splatting. He began to enter search parameters. He was instructed to have his search include not just their city, but all of America, which stretched nearly 1,000 miles across the middle of the continent. Then he narrowed the search to towns with populations under 10,000 that were also on the banks of rivers. Then to homes or apartments that were within 100 feet of the riverbank. Then he searched for people 20 and older who lived in those residences. That gave him more than 40,000 people. He had done that within 5 minutes. The next few requirements were not going to be as easy to nail down. The subject must be a strong swimmer. He got a list of every high school and university in each river town and cross-referenced everyone who had been on the swim team for the past 20 years or had registered for a triathlon. About 800 people. The subject must be a dog lover. Using Scythe Faraday's access code, he found the subscription list of every publication and blog dealing with dogs. He accessed pet stores' databases to get the list of anyone who made regular purchases of dog food over the past few years. That brought the number down to 112 names. The subject must have a history of heroism in a non-professional capacity. He painstakingly searched the words hero, bravery, and rescue for all 112 names. He thought he'd be lucky if a single one came up, but to his surprise, 4 of them were noted to having done something heroic at some point in their lives. He clicked on each name and brought up 4 pictures. He immediately regretted it because the moment those names had faces, they became people instead of parameters. A man with a round face and a winning smile, a woman who could have been anyone's mother, and a guy with a bad case of bed hair. A man who looked like he hadn't shaved in 3 days. 4 people, and Rowan was about to decide which one would die tomorrow. He immediately found himself leaning towards the unshaven man, but realized he was showing a bias. A person shouldn't be discriminated against because he hadn't shaved for a picture. And was he ruling out the woman just because she was a woman? Okay then, the guy with the smile. But was Rowan overcompensating now by choosing the most pleasant looking of them? He decided to learn more about each of them, using Faraday's access code to dig up more personal information than he really should have been allowed to. But this was the person's life he was dealing with. Shouldn't he use any means necessary to make his decision fair? This one had run into a burning building in his youth to save a family member. But this one has 3 young kids. But this one volunteers in an animal shelter. But this one's brother was gleaned just 2 years ago. He thought each fact would help him, but the more he came to know about each of them, the harder the decision became. He kept digging into each of their lives, getting more and more desperate until he found the door open, and Scythe Faraday returned. It was dark out. When had night fallen? The scythe looked weary, and his robes were splattered with blood. Today's gleaning was more troublesome than expected, he said. Citra came out of the weapons den. All blades are now polished to a perfect shine, she announced. Faraday gave her his nod of approval. Then he turned to Rowan, who still sat at the computer. And who do we glean next? I narrowed it down to 4. And, said the scythe. All 4 fit the profile. And, said the scythe again. Well, this one just got married, and this one just bought a house. Pick one, said the scythe. And this one received an Immunitarian Award last year. Pick one, yelled the scythe, with ferocity Rowan had never heard from the man. The very walls seemed to recoil from his voice. Rowan thought he might get a reprieve as he had when Scythe Faraday asked him to hand the woman the cyanide pill. But no, today's test was very different. Rowan looked at Citra, who stood still in the doorway of the weapons den, frozen like a bystander at an accident. He was truly alone in this awful decision. Rowan looked at the screen, grimacing, and pointed to the man with bad hair. Him, Rowan said. Glean, him. Rowan closed his eyes. He had just condemned a man to death because he had a bad hair day. Then he felt Faraday put a firm hand on his shoulder. He thought he'd get a reprimand, but instead the scythe said, Well done. Rowan opened his eyes. Were this not the hardest thing you've ever done, I'd be concerned. Does it ever get easier? Rowan asked. I certainly hope not. I certainly hope not, the scythe said. The following afternoon, Bradford Ziller returned from work to find a scythe sitting in his living room. The scythe stood up as Bradford entered. His instinct told him to turn and run, but before he did, a teenage boy with a green armband who had been standing off to the side closed the door behind him. He waited with increasing dread for the scythe to speak, but instead the scythe gestured to the boy who cleared his throat and said, Mr. Ziller, you have been chosen for gleaning. Tell him the rest, Rowan, scythe said patiently. I mean to say that I chose you for gleaning. Bradford looked between the two of them, suddenly deeply relieved because this was clearly some sort of joke. Okay, who the hell are you? Who put you up to this? Then the scythe held up his hand showing his ring, and Bradford's spirits fell again, like the second drop of a roller coaster. That was no fake. It was the real thing. The boy is one of my apprentices, said the scythe. I'm sorry, said the boy. It's not personal. You just fit a certain profile. Back in the age of mortality, lots of people died trying to perform rescues. A lot of them were people who jumped into the flooded rivers to save their pets. Most of them were good swimmers, but that doesn't matter in a flood. The dogs, thought Bradford. That's right, the dogs. You can't hurt me, he said. You do, and my dogs will rip you to pieces. But where were they? Then a girl came out of his bedroom, wearing the same armband as the boy. I sedated all 3, she said. They'll be fine, but they won't be bothering anyone. There was blood on her arm. Not the dogs, but her own. They had bitten her. Good for them. It's not personal, the boy said again. I'm sorry. One apology is enough, the scythe told the boy, especially when it's genuine. Bradford guffawed. Even though he knew this was real, he just somehow found this funny. His knees weak, he settled onto the sofa, and his laughter resolved into misery. How was this fair? How was any of this fair? But then the boy knelt down before him, and when Bradford looked up, he was caught by the boy's gaze. It was as if he was looking into the eyes of a much older soul. Listen to me, Mr. Ziller, the boy said. I know you saved your sister from fire when you were my age. I know how hard you struggled to save your marriage, and I know you think that your daughter doesn't love you, but she does. Bradford stared at him, incredulous. How do you know all this? The boy pursed his lips. It's our job to know. Your gleaning won't change any of that. You lived a good life. Scythe Faraday is here to complete it for you. Bradford begged to make a phone call, pleaded for just one more day, but of course, those things were not granted. They said he could write a note, but he couldn't bring himself to find anything to write. I know how that feels, the boy told him. How will you do it? He finally asked them. The scythe responded, I have chosen for you a traditional drowning. We shall take you to the river. I shall submerge you until your life leaves you. Bradford clenched his eyes. I've heard that drowning is a bad way to go. Can I give him some of the stuff I gave the dogs? The girl asked. Knock him out so he'll already be unconscious? The scythe considered it and nodded. If you choose, we can spare you the suffering. But Bradford shook his head, realizing he wanted every second he had left. No, I want to be awake. If drowning was to be his last experience, then let him experience it. He could feel his heart beating faster, his body trembling with the surge of adrenaline. He was afraid, but the fear meant he was still alive. Come then, the scythe told him gently. We'll all go down to the river together. Citra was awed by how Rowan handled himself. Although he began a little shaky when he first spoke to the man, he took charge. He took the reins of the man's fear and gave him peace. Citra only hoped that when it came her turn to make a choice, she could keep her composure as well as Rowan had. All she had done today was tranquilize a few of his dogs. Sure, she had gotten bitten in the process, but it was nothing, really. She tried to convince Faraday to take the dogs to a shelter, but he wouldn't have it. He did allow her to call the shelter to come for the dogs, and the coroner to come for the man. The scythe offered to take her to a hospital for some speed healing of the dog bite on her arm, but she declined. Her own nanites would heal by morning, and besides, there was something compelling about the discomfort. She owed it to the dead man to hurt a little for him. That was impressive, she told Rowan on their long ride home. Yeah, right, until he puked on the riverbank. But that was only after he was gleaned, Citra pointed out. You gave that man strength to face death. Rowan shrugged. I guess. Citra found it both maddening and endearing how modest he could be. Journal entry. There's a poem by Honorable Scythe Socrates, one of the first Scythes. He wrote many poems, but this one has grown to be my personal favorite. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon, cull from the fold all the brazen and bold. For a dog who just might love the bark and the bite, it's a carrion raven, the craven of old. It reminds me that in spite of our lofty ideals and the many safeguards to protect the scythe from corruption and depravity, we must always be vigilant, because power comes infected with the only disease left to us, the virus called human nature. I fear for us all if scythes begin to love what they do. From the Gleaning Journal of HS3. Chapter 9. Esme. Esme ate far too much pizza. Her mother told her pizza would be the death of her. She never imagined it might actually be true. The scythe attack came less than a minute after she was given her slice, piping hot from the oven. It was the end of the school day, and the daily trials of 4th grade had exhausted her. Lunch had sucked, the tuna salad her mother had given her was warm and mildly fermented by the time lunch rolled around. Not exactly appetizing. Exhausted her. Chapter 9. Esme. Esme ate far too much pizza. Her mother told her pizza would be the death of her. She never imagined it might actually be true. The scythe attack came less than a minute after she was given her slice, piping hot from the oven. It was the end of the school day, and the daily trials of 4th grade had exhausted her. Lunch had sucked, the tuna salad her mother had given her was warm and mildly fermented by the time lunch rolled around. Not exactly appetizing. In fact, none of the food her mother packed for her hit high on the flavor scale. She was trying to get Esme to eat healthier, because Esme had a bit of a weight problem, and although her nanites could be programmed to speed up her metabolism, her mother wouldn't hear of it. She claimed to be treating the symptom, not the problem. You can't solve everything by tweaking your nanites, her mother told her. You need to learn self-control. Well, she could learn self-control tomorrow. Today, she wanted pizza. Her favorite pizza place, Luigi's, was in the food court of the Fulcrum City Galleria, which was on her way home from school. Sort of. She was negotiating the cheese, trying to figure out how to take that first bite without burning the roof of her mouth when the scythe arrived. Her back was to them, so she didn't see them at first, but she heard them, or at least one of them. Good afternoon, good people, he said. Your lives are about to change in a fundamental way. Esme turned to see them, 4 of them. They were clad in bright robes that glittered. They looked like no one Esme had ever seen. She had never met a scythe. She was fascinated, until 3 of them pulled out weapons that glistened even more than their bejeweled robes, and the 4th pulled out a flamethrower. This food court has been selected for gleaning, the leader said, and they began their terrible mission. Esme knew what she had to do. Forgetting her pizza, she dropped beneath the table and crawled away. But she wasn't the only one. It seemed everyone had dropped and was scrambling on the floor. It didn't seem to faze the scythe. She could see their feet through the crawling crowd. The fact that their victims were on all fours did not slow them down in the least. Now, Esme began to panic. She had heard stories of scythes who did mass gleanings, but until now she thought they were nothing but stories. Before her, she could see the robes of the scythe in yellow, so she doubled back, only to find the scythe in green closing in. Esme crawled between a gap in the tables and between two potted palms that the scythe in orange had set on fire. And when she emerged on the other side of the large pots, she found herself with no cover. She was at the food concessions now. The man who had served her pizza was slumped over the counter, dead. There was a gap between a trash can and the wall. She was not a slim girl, so she thought the skinniest thought she could and squeezed her way into the gap. It was not much of a hiding space, but if she left it, she would be right in the line of fire. She had already seen two people trying to dart across the walkway, and both were taken down by steel crossbow arrows. She didn't dare move, so instead, she buried her face in her hands. She stayed that way, sobbing, listening to the terrible sounds around her, until silence fell. Still, she refused to open her eyes until she heard a man say, "Hello there." Esme opened her eyes to see the lead scythe, the one in blue, standing over her. "Please," she begged, "please don't glean me." The man held out his hand to her. "The gleaning is over," he said. "There's no one left but you. Now take my hand." Afraid to refuse, Esme reached out and placed her hand in his, and rose from her hiding place. "I've been looking for you, Esme," he said. Esme gasped when she heard her name. Why would a scythe be looking for me? The other three scythes gathered around. None of them raised a weapon at her. "You'll be coming with us now," the scythe in blue said. But my mother..." "Your mother knows. I've granted her immunity." "Really?" "Yes, really." Then the girl scythe in emerald green handed Esme a plate. "I believe this was your pizza." Esme took it. It was cool enough to eat now. "Thank you." "Come with us," said the scythe in blue, "and I promise you from this moment on, your life will be everything you ever dreamed it could be." And so, Esme left with the four scythes, thankful to be alive, and trying not to think of the many around her who weren't. This was certainly not the way she imagined her day would go, but who was she to fight something against that ranked so clearly of destiny? Journal entry. Was there ever a time when people weren't plagued with boredom? A time when motivation wasn't so hard to come by? When I look at news archives from the age of mortality, it seems people had more reasons to do the things they did. Life was about forging time, not just passing time. In those news reports, how exciting they were. Filled with all nature of criminal activity, your neighbor could be a salesperson of illegal chemicals for recreation. Ordinary people would take life without the permission of society. Angry individuals would take possession of vehicles they didn't own, then lead law enforcement officers in a dangerous pursuit on uncontrolled roadways. We do have the unsavories nowadays, but they do little more than drop occasional pieces of litter and move shop items to places they don't belong. No one rages against the system anymore. At most, they just glare at it a bit. Perhaps this is why the Thunderhead still allowed a measured amount of economic inequality. It could certainly make sure that everyone had equal wealth, but that would just add to the plague of boredom that afflicts the immortal. Although we have all what we need, we're still allowed to strive for the things we want. Of course, no one strives like they did in the mortal days, when the inequality was so great people would actually steal from one another, sometimes ending lives in the process. I wouldn't want the return of crime, but I do tire of us scythes being the sole purveyors of fear. It would be nice to have competition. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 10. Forbidden Responses. Dude, I'm telling you, it's all anyone can talk about. Everyone thinks you're becoming a scythe to take revenge on the school. On a mild day in March, on one of the rare afternoons that Scythe Fair Day allowed Rowan downtime, Rowan had gone to visit his friend, Tiger, who had not spotted once in the past 3 months. Now they shot hoops at a park just a few blocks away from Rowan's home, where he wasn't allowed to visit, and might not have even, if he were allowed. Rowan threw Tiger the ball. "That's not why I accepted the apprenticeship. I know that, and you know that, but people will believe whatever they want to believe." He grinned. "Suddenly I got all sorts of game because I'm your friend. They think I can get them access to your ring. Immunity talks, death walks." The thought of Tiger playing intercessor on his behalf almost made Rowan laugh. He could see Tiger milking that for all it was worth, probably charging people for the service. Rowan stole the ball and took a shot. He hadn't played since before moving into the scythe, but he found his arm, if not his aim, was stronger than ever, and he had endless stamina, all thanks to his Book of Tour training. So when you get your ring, you are going to give me immunity, right? Tiger took a shot and missed. It was clearly intentional. He was letting Rowan win. "First of all, I don't know that he'll choose me to get the ring, and secondly, I can't give you immunity." Tiger looked genuinely shocked. "What? Why not?" "That's playing favorites. Isn't that what friends are for?" A few other kids came to the court and asked if maybe they wanted to play a pickup game, but the second they saw Rowan's armband, they had a change of heart. "No worries," the oldest one said. "It's all yours." It was exasperating. "No, we can all play." "Nah, we'll go play somewhere else." "I said we can all play," Rowan insisted. And he saw such fear in the other kid's eyes, he felt ashamed for pushing. Yeah, sure," said the other kid. He turned to his friend. "You heard the man. Play." They took to the court in earnest, and in earnest played to lose, just as Tiger had. Was this how it would always be? Was he now such an intimidating presence that even his own friends would be afraid to truly challenge him? The only one who ever challenged him anyway now was Citra. Rowan quickly lost interest in the game and left with Tiger, who found it all amusing. "Dude, you're not lettuce anymore. You're deadly nightshade. You're the mean greens now." Tiger was right. If Rowan had told those kids to get down on all four and lick the pavement, they would have. It was heady and horrible, and he didn't want to think about it. Rowan didn't know what possessed him to do what he did next. Frustration as isolation maybe, or maybe just wanting to bring a sliver of his old life into his new one. "Want to come over and see the scythe's place?" Tiger was a little dubious. "Will he mind?" "He's not there," Rowan told him. "He's gleaning in another city today. He won't be home till late." He knew that the Scythe Fair Day would blow a brainstem if he found that Rowan had someone over. It made the desire to do so even more enticing. He had been so good, so obedient, it was about time he did something that he wanted to do. When they arrived, the house was empty. Citra, who also was granted a free afternoon by Scythe Fair Day, was out. He had wanted Tiger to meet her, but then thought, what if they happen to like each other? What if Tiger charms her? He always had a way with girls. He had even convinced a girl to splat with him once, just so he could say, "Girls fall for me." Literally. It'd be like Romeo and Juliet, he then told her, except we get to come back. Needless to say, the girl's parents were livid, and after she was revived, they forbade her from to see Tiger ever again. Tiger shrugged it off. What can I say? Her life is a tale told by idiots, which Rowan believed was a very bad Shakespeare misquote. The thought of Citra falling for Tiger, even just figuratively, made Rowan a bit nauseated. "This is it?" Tiger said as he looked around the place. "It's just a house." "What did you expect? A secret underground lair?" "Actually, yeah, or something like it. I mean, look at this furniture. I can't believe he makes you live in this hellhole." "It's not so bad. Come on, I'll show you something cool." He took Tiger to the weapons den, which was expected. Tiger found truly impressive. "This is so edge. I've never seen so many knives. What are those guns? I've only seen pictures." He took a pistol off the wall and looked in the barrel. "Don't do that." "Calm down. I'm a splitter, not a blaster." Rowan took it away from him anyway, and in the time it took to put it back on the wall, Tiger had taken down a machete and was swishing it through the air. "Think I could borrow this?" "Absolutely not." "Come on, he's got so many, he'll never miss it." Tiger, Rowan knew, was the very definition of bad idea. That had always been part of the fun of being his friend, but now that was a major liability. Rowan grabbed Tiger's arm, kicked him behind the knee to buckle his leg, and spun him to the ground, and all in a single Bokatar move. Then he held Tiger's arm at an unnatural angle, with just enough leverage for it to hurt. "What the hell?" Tiger said through gritted teeth. "Drop the machete, now!" Tiger did, and just then they heard the front door being opened. Rowan let go. "Be quiet," he said in a power whisper. He peeked at the door but couldn't see her come in. "Stay here." He told Tiger, then he slipped out to find Citra closing the front door behind her. She must have been running because she wore a workout outfit that was much more revealing than Rowan needed at the moment. It drained far too much blood from his brain, so he focused on her apprentice armband to remind himself that hormonal responses were strictly forbidden. Citra looked up and gave him an obligatory greeting. "Hey, Rowan." "Hey. Something wrong?" "No. Why are you just standing there?" "Where should I be standing?" She rolled her eyes and went into the bathroom, closing the door. Rowan slipped back into the weapons den. "Who is it?" asked Tiger. Is it what's her name? I want to meet your competition. Maybe she'll give me immunity, or something else." "No," Rowan told him. "It's Scythe Faraday, and he'll glean you on the spot if he finds you here." Suddenly Tiger's bravado evaporated. "Oh, crap. What are we going to do?" "Calm down. He's taking a shower. As long as you're quiet, I can get you out." They came out into the hallway. Sure enough, the sound of a shower hissed behind the closed bathroom door. "He's washing off the blood?" "Yeah, there was a lot of it." He led Tiger through the front door and did everything short of pushing him out. After being an apprentice for nearly 3 months, Citra couldn't deny that she wanted to be chosen by Scythe Faraday to receive the ring. As much as she resisted, as much as she told herself this was not the life for her, she had come to see its importance and how good a Scythe she could be. She had always wanted to live a life of substance and to make a difference. As a Scythe, she would. Yes, she would have blood on her hands, but blood can be a cleansing thing. It was certainly treated as such in Bokator. Citra found Black Widow Bokator to be the most physically demanding thing she had ever done. Their trainer was Scythe Yingjing, who used no weapons but his own hands and feet to glean. He had taken a vow of silence. It seemed every Scythe had surrendered something of themselves, not because they had to, but because they chose to, as a way for them to pay for the lives they took. "What would you give up?" Rowan once asked Citra. The question made her uncomfortable. "If I become a Scythe, I'm giving up my life, aren't I? I think that's enough." "You're also giving up family," Rowan reminded her. She nodded, not wanting to speak to it. The idea of having a family was so far off to her, the idea of not having one felt equally distant. It was hard to have feelings about something that was years away from even considering. Besides, such things had to be kept far from her mind during Bokator. One's mind had to be clear. Citra had never taken any sort of martial art before. She had always been a non-contact sport kind of girl. Track, swimming, tennis. Any sport that had a clear lane or net between her and her opponent. Bokator was the antithesis of that. Hand-to-hand, body-to-body combat. Even communication was entirely physical in class, as their mutant instructor would correct their positions as if they were action figures. It was all mind and body, without the brash mediation of words. There were 8 in their class, and although their instructor was a Scythe, Citra and Rowan were the only apprentices. The others were junior Scythes, in the first years of their Scythehood. There was one other girl who made no overtures of friendship to Citra. The girls were given no special treatment, and were expected to be every bit equal of the boys. Sparring was punishing in Bokator. Each match began simple enough, with the ritualistic strutting around the circle, the two combatants physically taunting each other in a sort of aggressive dance. Then, things got serious, and brutal. All nature of kicks and punches and body slams. Today, she sparred against Rowan, who had more finesse to his moves, but she had the advantage of speed. He was stronger, but he was also taller, which was not an asset. Citra's lower center of gravity made her more stable. All taken into account, they were evenly matched. She spun and gave Rowan a powerful kick to the chest that almost took him down. "Good one," Rowan said. Scythe Yingjing sipped his own lips, to remind them that there was no crosstalk during combat. She came at him from his left, and he countered so quickly, she had no idea where his hand had come from. It was as if he was suddenly had 3. She was thrown off balance, but only for an instant. She felt heat where his hand was connected with her side. "There'll be a bruise," she grinned. "He'll pay for that." She feinted left again, then came at him from the right with the full force of her body. She took him down and had him pinned, but it was as if gravity reversed, and suddenly she realized he had turned the tables. Now he was on top, pinning her. She could have flipped him again. She had the leverage, but she didn't do it. She could feel his heartbeat now, as if they were beating in her own chest, and she realized she wanted to feel that a little longer. She wanted to feel it more than she wanted to win the match. That made her angry. Angry enough to pull away from his grip and put some space between them. There was no lane line. No net. Nothing to keep them apart but the wall of her will. But that wall kept losing bricks. Scythe Yingjing signaled the end of the match. Citra and Rowan bowed to each other, then took their places on opposite sides of the circle, as 2 others were called up to spar. Citra watched intently, determined not to give Rowan a single glance. Journal entry. We are not the same beings we once were. Consider our inability to grasp literature and most entertainment from the mortal age. To us, the things that stirred mortal human emotions are incomprehensible. Only stories of love pass through our post-mortal filter. Yet even then, we are baffled by the intensity of longing and loss that threatens those mortal tales of love. We could blame it on our emo nanites limiting our despair, but it runs far deeper than that. Mortals fantasize that love was eternal and its loss unimaginable. Now we know that neither is true. Love remained mortal while we became eternal. Only Scythes can equalize that, but everyone knows the chance of being gleaned in this or even the next millennium is so low as to be ignored. We are not the same beings we once were. So then, if we are no longer human, what are we? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 11. Indiscretions. Citra and Rowan were not always together at gleanings. Sometimes, Scythe Faraday took just one of them. Citra witnessed took place in early May, just a week before Vernal Conclave, the first of the 3 conclaves she and Rowan would attend during their apprenticeship. Their quarry was a man who had just turned the corner and reset his age to 24. He was at home having dinner with his wife and 2 kids, who seemed to be around Citra's age, when Scythe Faraday announced who they had come for. The family wept, and the man slipped off into a bedroom. Scythe Faraday had chosen a peaceful bloodletting for the man, but that was not what happened. When Citra and the Scythe entered the room, he ambushed them. The man was in peak condition, and his arrogance from his new rejuvenation, he rejected the gleaning and fought the Scythe, breaking his jaw with a vicious punch. Citra came to his aid, trying some Bokator moves she had learned from Scythe Yingjing, and quickly learned that applying a martial art is much different from practice in a dojo. The man swatted her away and advanced on Faraday, who was still reeling from his injury. Citra leaped on him again, clinging to him, for the moment giving up on anything beyond eye gouging and hair pulling. It distracted him just long enough for Scythe Faraday to pull out a hunting knife he had concealed in his robe and slit the man's throat. He began gasping for air, his hands to his neck, trying to futilely to hold back the flow of blood. And Scythe Faraday, holding his hand to his own swelling jaw, spoke to him, not with malice, but with great sorrow. "Do you understand the consequences of what you have done?" The man could not answer. He fell to the ground quivering, gasping. Citra thought death from such a wound would be instantaneous, but apparently not. She had never seen so much blood. Stay here, the Scythe told her. Look upon him kindly, and be the last thing he sees. Then he left the room. Citra knew what he was going to do. The law was very clear as to the consequences of running from or resisting one's gleaning. She couldn't close her eyes, because she was instructed not to, but if there was a way, she wished she could have closed her ears, because she knew what was about to happen, and what she was about to hear from the living room. It began with pleas from the woman begging for the lives of her children, and the children sobbing in despair. Do not beg! Citra heard the Scythe say sharply. Show these children more courage than your husband did. Citra kept her gaze fixed on the dying man until his eyes finally emptied life. Then she went to join Scythe Faraday, steeling herself for what was to come. The two children were on their sofa, their sobs having degraded into tearful whimpers. The woman was on her knees, whispering to them, comforting them. Are you quite done? The Scythe said impatiently. At last the woman rose. Her eyes were tearful, but they no longer seemed pleading. Do what you have to do, she said. Good, said the Scythe. I applaud your fortitude. Now, as it happens, your husband did not resist his gleaning. Then he touched his swelling face. However, my apprentice and I had an altercation resulting in these wounds. The woman just stared at him, her jaw slightly unhinged. So was Citra's. The Scythe turned to Citra and glared at her. Altercation resulted the Scythe. I applaud your fortitude. Now, as it happens, your husband did not resist his gleaning. Then he touched his swelling face. However, my apprentice and I had an altercation resulting in these wounds. The woman just stared at him, her jaw slightly unhinged. So was Citra's. The Scythe turned to Citra and glared at her. My apprentice shall be severely disciplined for fighting with me. Then he turned back to the woman. Please kneel. The woman fell to her knees, not so much a kneel as a collapse. Scythe Faraday held out his ring to her. As is customary, you and your children shall receive immunity for gleaning for 1 year henceforth. Each of you, please kiss my ring. The woman kissed it again and again and again. The Scythe said little after they left. They rode a bus because whenever possible the Scythe avoided the use of a public car. He saw it as an extravagance. When they got off at their stop, Citra dared to speak. Shall I be disciplined for breaking your jaw? Citra knew it would be healed by morning, but the healing nights were not spontaneous. He still looked pretty awful. You will speak to no one of this, he told sternly. You will not even comment on it in your journal. Is that clear? The man's indiscretion shall never be known. Yes, Your Honor. She wanted to tell him how much she admired him for what he had done. Choosing compassion over obligation. There was a lesson to be learned in every gleaning, and today's was one she would not soon forget. The sanctity of the law, and the wisdom to know when it must be broken. Citra, try as she might to be a stellar apprentice, was not immune to indiscretion herself. One of Citra's nightly chores was to bring Scythe Faraday a glass of warm milk before bed. As in my childhood, warm milk smooths the edges of the day, the Scythe had told her. I have, however, dispensed with the cookie that once came with it. The thought of Scythe Faraday having milk and cookies before bed bordered on absurd to Citra, but she supposed even an agent of death would have guilty pleasures. Quite often, however, when a gleaning had been difficult, he would fall asleep before she came into his room at the appointed time with the milk. In those cases, she would drink it herself or give it to Rowan, because Scythe Faraday made it clear that nothing in this household was ever wasted. On the night of that awful gleaning, she lingered in his room a bit longer. Scythe Faraday, she said gently, then said it again, no response. Then said it again, no response. She could tell by his breathing he was out. There was an object on the nightstand. In fact, it was there every night, his ring. It caught the oblique light spilling in from the hallway. Even in the dim room it glittered. She downed the glass of milk and set it on the nightstand, so that in the morning the Scythe would see that she had brought it and that it hadn't been wasted. Then she knelt there, her eyes fixed on the ring. She wondered why he never slept with it, but felt like asking would be some sort of intrusion. When she received hers, if she received hers, would it retain the solemn mystery that it had held for her now, or would it become ordinary to her? Would she come to take it for granted? She reached forward, then drew her hand back, then reached forward again and gently took the ring. She turned it in her fingers so that it caught the light. The stone was big, about the size of an acorn. It was said to be a diamond, but there was a darkness in its core that made it different from a simple diamond ring. There was something in the core of that ring, but no one knew what it was. She wondered if even the Scythes themselves knew. The center wasn't exactly black. It was a deep discoloration that looked different depending on the light, the way a person's eyes sometimes do. Then, when she glanced at the Scythe, she could see that his eyes were open and watching her. She froze, knowing she was caught, knowing that putting the ring down now wouldn't change that. Would you like to try it on? Scythe Faraday asked. No, she said. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched it. You shouldn't have, but you did. She wondered if he had been awake this whole time. Go ahead, he told her. Try it on. I insist. She was dubious, but did as she was told, because in spite of what she told him, she did want to try it on. It felt warm on her finger. It was sized for the Scythe, so it was too large for her. It was also heavier than she imagined. Do you worry that it will ever be stolen? She asked. Not really. Anyone foolish enough to steal a Scythe ring is quickly removed from the world, so they ceased to be a problem. The ring was getting noticeably cooler. It is a covetable object, though, don't you agree? The Scythe said. Suddenly, Citra realized the ring wasn't just cool, it was freezing. The metal, in a matter of seconds, had grown white with frost, and her fingers were such an intense pain from the cold, she cried out and pulled the ring from her hand. It flew across the room. Not only was her ring finger severely frostbitten, so were the fingers that had pulled it free. She bit back a whimper. She could now feel warmth flowing through her body as her healing eyes released morphine. She became woozy, but forced herself to stay alert. A security measure, I installed myself, the Scythe said. A microcoolant chip in the setting. Let me see. He turned on the nightstand light and grabbed her hand, looking at her ring finger. The flesh of the joint was pale blue and frozen solid. In the age of mortality, you might have lost a finger, but I trust your nanites are already mending the damage. He let go of her hand. You'll be fine by morning. Perhaps next time you'll think before touching things that don't belong to you. He retrieved his ring, set it back on the nightstand, then handed her the empty glass. From now on, Rowan will bring me my evening milk, he said. Citra deflated. I'm sorry I disappointed you, Your Honor. You're right. I don't deserve to bring you your milk. He raised an eyebrow. You misunderstand. This is not a punishment. Curiosity is human. I merely allowed you to get it out of your system. I have to say, it took you long enough. Then gave her a little conspiratorial grin. Now let's see how long it takes Rowan to go for the ring. Journal entry. Sometimes, when the weight of my job becomes overwhelming, I begin to lament all the things lost when we conquered death. I think about religion, and how once we became our own saviors, our own gods, most faith became irrelevant. What must it have been like to believe in something greater than oneself, to accept imperfection, and look to a rising vision of all we could never be? It must have been comforting, it must have been frightening, it must have lifted people from the mundane, but also justified all sorts of evil. I often wonder if the bright benefit of belief outweighed the darkness its abuse could bring. But like so many things in our world, they seek to imitate what once was. The rituals are not to be taken seriously. They exist merely to make the passing of time feel meaningful and profound. Lately, I've been preoccupied with a tone called in my neighborhood. I went into their gathering place the other day. I was there to glean one of the old congregates, a man who had not yet turned his first corner. They were intoning what they called the resonant frequency of the universe. One of them told me that the sound is alive, and that harmonizing with it brings inner peace. I wonder, when they look at the great tuning fork that stands as a symbol of their faith, if they truly believe it to be a symbol of power, or are they just joining in a communal joke? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 12. No room for mediocrity. The Scythedom is the world's only self-governing body, said Scythe Faraday. While the rest of the world is under Thunderhead rule, the Scythedom is not, which is why we hold conclave 3 times a year to resolve disputes, review policy, and warn the lives we've taken. Vernal Conclave, which was to take place during the first week of May, was less than a week away. Rowan and Citra had studied enough of the structure of the Scythedom to know all 25 regions of the world held their conclaves on the same day, and that there were currently 321 sites in their region, which encompassed the heart of North American continent. The Mid-American Conclave is an important one, Scythe Faraday told them, because we tend to set the trend for much of the world. There's an expression, as goes Mid-America, so goes the planet. The Grand Slayers Scythe of the global conclave always have their eyes on us. Scythe Faraday explained that at each conclave they would be tested. I do not know the nature of the first test, which is why you need to be as prepared as possible in all aspects of your training. Rowan found he had a million questions about conclave, but kept them to himself. He let Citra do all the asking, mainly because the questions irritated Scythe Faraday, and he never answered them. You'll find out all you need to know when you get there, the Scythe told him. For now, all your attention must be on your training and your studies. Rowan had never been an exceptional student, but that was by design. To be either too good or too bad drew attention. As much as he hated being the lettuce, it was his comfort zone. If you apply yourself, I have no doubt you could be at the top of your class, his science teacher told him after getting the highest grade on his midterm last year. He had done it just to see if he could. Now that he knew, he saw no great need to do it again. There were many reasons, not the least of which was his own ignorance about scythes in those days before his apprenticeship. He assumed that being a stellar student would make him a target. Supposedly a friend of a friend was gleaned at 11 because he was the smartest kid in 5th grade. It was nothing more than an urban myth, but Rowan believed it just enough to keep him from wanting to stand out. He wondered if the other kids held back for fear of being gleaned. He had little experience with being so studious. He found it exhausting, and there was more than just poison chemistry, post-mortal history, and journaling. There was metallurgy, as it applies to weapons, the philosophy of mortality, the psychology of immortality, and the literature of the Scythedom, from poetry to the wisdom found in famous Scythe journals. And of course, mathematical statistics that Scythe Faraday relied upon so heavily. There was no room for mediocrity, especially now with the conclave coming up. Rowan did ask him one question about conclave. Will we be disqualified if we fail the test? Faraday took a moment before answering. No, he told him, but there is a consequence. Although he would not tell them what the consequence was, Rowan concluded that not knowing was more terrifying than knowing. With just a few days before conclave, he and Citra stayed up late studying in the weapons den. Rowan found himself dozing, but was quickly awakened when Citra slammed a book. I hate this, she announced. Cerberin, aconite, conium, polonium. The poisons are all running together in my head. That would sure make a person die faster, Rowan said with a smirk. She crossed her arms. Do you know your poisons? Rowan's supposed to know 40 by conclave, he pointed out. And do you know them? I will, he told her. What's the molecular formula for tetrodotoxin? He wanted to ignore her, but found he couldn't back away from the challenge. Perhaps a bit of her competitive nature was rubbing off on him. C11, H17, N3, O6. Wrong, she said, pointing a finger at him. It's 08, not 06. You fail. She was trying to rile him up so she wouldn't be the only one riled. He wasn't going to oblige. Guess so, he said, and tried to return to his studies. Aren't you the least bit worried? He took a breath and closed his book. When Faraday first began teaching them, Rowan found the use of actual old-school books very off-putting, but over time, he learned that there was something very satisfying to the turning of pages, and as Citra had already discovered, the emotional catharsis of slamming a book shut. Of course I'm worried, but here's the way I look at it. We know they won't disqualify us, and we already know we can't be gleaned, and we'll have 2 more chances to make up for any screw-ups before one of us is chosen. Whatever the consequences of failing the first round of tests, if either of us fail, we'll deal with it. Citra slumped in her chair. I don't fail, she said, but didn't sound too convinced of it. There was this pouty look on her face that made Rowan want to smile, but he didn't because he knew that would infuriate her. He actually liked how she would get infuriated. But they had too much work to do to indulge in emotional distraction. Rowan put away his toxicology book and pulled out the volume on weapons identification. They were required to be able to identify 30 different weapons, how to wield them, and their detailed history. Rowan was more worried about that than the poisons. He spared a glance at Citra, who noticed the glance, so he tried not to look at her again. Then, out of nowhere, she said, I would miss you. He looked up and she looked away. How do you mean? I mean that if disqualifications was part of the rules, I'd miss having you around. He considered reaching out to take her hand, which rested gently on the table. But the table was big, and her hand was too far away for it to be anything other than insanely awkward. Then again, even if they sat closer, it would be an insane thing to do. But it's not part of the rules, he said, which means that no matter what, you're stuck with me for 8 more months. She grinned. Yeah, I'm sure I'll really be sick of you by then. It was the first time it occurred to Rowan that she might not hate him as much as he thought. Journal entry. The quota system has worked for over 200 years, and although it fluctuates region to region, it makes it crystal clear what each site's responsibility to the world is. Of course, it's all based on averages. We can go days or even weeks without gleaning, but we must meet our quota before the next conclave. There are those eager ones who glean early and find themselves with little to do as conclave draws near. There are those who procrastinate and have to hurry towards the end. Both those approaches lead to sloppiness and unintentional bias. I often wonder if the quota will ever change, and if so, how much. Population growth is still off the charts, but it's balanced by the Thunderhead's ability to provide for an ever-increasing population. Renewable resources, subsurface dwellings, artificial islands, and all without there ever being any less green or sense of overcrowding. We have mastered this world, and yet protected it in a way that our forefathers could scarcely have dreamed. But all things are limited. While the Thunderhead does not interfere with the Scythedom, it does suggest the number of scythes there should be in the world. Currently, there are approximately 5 million people gleaned per year worldwide. A tiny fraction of the death rate and age of mortality, and nowhere near enough to balance the population growth. I shudder to think how many more scythes it would take, and how many gleanings would be required if we ever need to curb population growth altogether. From the Gleaning Journal of HS3. Chapter 13. Vernal Conclave. Fulcrum City was a post-mortal metropolis toward the very end of Mid-America. There, by the river set low between the sky-soaring spires of graceful city living, was a venerable structure of stone. Marble columns and arches supported a great copper dome. It was an unyielding homage to ancient Greece and imperial Rome, the birthing grounds of civilization. It was still called the Capitol building, for it was once a state capital, back when there were still states, in those days before government became obsolete. Now, it had the honor of holding the administrative offices of the Mid-American Scythedom, as well as hosting its conclave 3 times a year. It was pouring rain the day of the vernal conclave. Citra rarely minded the rain, but a day of gloom coupled with a day of pure tension did not sit well with her. But then, a bright sunny day would feel mocking. Citra realized there was no good day to be presented to an intimidating elegy of sights. Fulcrum City was only an hour away by hypertrain, but of course, Scythe Faraday saw hypertrains as an unnecessary extravagance. Besides, I want scenery rather than a windowless subterranean tunnel. I'm a human being, not a mole. A standard train took 6 hours, and Citra did enjoy the scenery along the way, although she spent most of the trip studying. Fulcrum City was on the Mississippi River. She recalled that there was once a giant silver arch on the riverbank, but it was gone now, destroyed back in the age of mortality by something called terrorism. She'd have learned more about the city if she weren't so focused on her poisons and weapons. They had arrived the evening before conclave and stayed in a downtown hotel. Morning came much too quickly. As Citra, Rowan, and Scythe Faraday walked from their hotel at the awful hour of 6:30 a.m., people in the streets ran to them and handed them umbrellas, choosing to get wet rather than see a Scythe and his apprentices go without one. Do they know you've taken 2 apprentices instead of just 1? Citra asked. Of course they know, said Rowan. Why wouldn't they? but Scythe Faraday's silence on the matter was a clear red flag to Citra. You did clear it with the high blade, didn't you, Scythe Faraday? I have found with the Scythedom, it is better to ask forgiveness than permission, he told them. Citra gave Rowan "I told you so" look, and he cocked his umbrella slightly so he didn't have to see it. It will not be a problem, Faraday said, but he didn't sound very convincing. Citra looked to Rowan again, who was no longer eclipsed by his umbrella. Am I the only one who's worried about that? Rowan shrugged. We have immunity until Winter Conclave, and it can't be revoked. Everyone knows that. What's the worst they could do? Some Scythes arrived at the Capitol building on foot, as they had. Others in public cars, some in private cars, and several in limousines. There were ropes to hold back spectators on either side of the wide marble staircase leading up to the building, as well as peace officers and members of the Blade Guard, the Scythedem's elite security force. The arriving Scythes were protected from their adoring public, even if the public were not protected from them. I despise, Scythe Faraday said, referring to the climbing the steps to Conclave. It's even worse when it's not raining. The crowd on either side is a dozen people deep. Now, it was only half that. It never occurred to Citra that people would come out to see Scythe arriving at Conclave. But then, all celebrity events drew onlookers, so why not a gathering of Scythes? Some of the arriving Scythes gave obligatory waves, others played to the crowd, kissing babies and randomly granting immunity. Citra and Rowan followed Faraday's lead, which was to ignore the crowd completely. There were dozens of other Scythes in the entry vestibule. They removed their raincoats to reveal robes of all colors, all textures. It was a rainbow that summoned forth anything but thoughts of death. This, Citra realized, was intentional. Scythes, which should be seen as the many facets of light, not of darkness. Through a grand arch lay a grander chamber beneath the central dome, a rotunda where hundreds of Scythes greeted one another, engaging in casual conversation around an elaborate breakfast spread in the center. Citra wondered what it was the Scythes talked about: the tools of gleaning, the weather, the chafing of their robes. It was intimidating enough to be in the presence of a single Scythe. To be surrounded by hundreds was enough to make one crumble. Scythe Faraday leaned over and spoke to them in a hushed voice. See there? He pointed to a bald, heavy-bearded man. Scythe Archimedes, one of the world's oldest living Scythes. He'll tell you he was there in the year of the Condor when the Scythedom was first formed. But it's a lie. He's not that old. And over there, he pointed to a woman with long silver hair and pale lavender robes. That's Scythe Curie, Citra gasped. The Grand Dame of Death? So they say. Is it true she gleaned the last president before the Thunderhead was given control? Citra asked. And his cabinet, yes. He looked at her, perhaps a bit wistfully, Citra thought. Her actions were quite controversial back in the day. The woman caught them glancing her way and turned to them. Citra chilled when her piercing gray eyes zeroed in on her. Then the woman smiled at the three of them, nodded, and returned to her conversation. There was a group of 4 or 5 Scythes closer to the assembly chamber entrance, the doors of which were still closed. They wore bright robes studded with gems. The center of their attention was a Scythe in royal blue, whose robe contained what appeared to be diamonds. He said something, and the others laughed a little too heartily for it to be anything but sycophantic. Who's that? Citra asked. Scythe Faraday's expression took a turn towards sour. That, he said, not even trying to hide his distaste, is Scythe Goddard, and his company is best avoided. Goddard? Isn't he the master of mass gleanings? Rowan asked. Faraday looked at him a bit concerned. Where did you hear that? Rowan shrugged. I have a friend who's obsessed with that kind of stuff, and he hears things. Citra gasped, realizing she had heard of Goddard, not by name, just by deed. Or more accurately, rumor, because there was never any official report. But, like Rowan said, you hear things. Isn't he the one who gleaned an entire airplane? Why? Asked Faraday, giving her a cold, accusing eye. Does that impress you? Citra shook her head. No, the opposite. But she couldn't help but be a bit dazzled by the way the man's robe caught the light. Everyone was, which must have been his intent. And yet, his was not the most ostentatious robe on display. Moving through the crowd was a Scythe in a lavishly gilded robe. The man was so large, his robe seemed a bit like a golden tent. Who's the fat guy? Citra asked. He looks important, said Rowan. Indeed, said Scythe Faraday. The fat guy, as you call him, is the High Blade, the most powerful man in the Mid-American Scythedom. He presides over Conclave. The High Blade worked the crowd like a great gaseous planet bending space around it. He could have tweaked his nanites and eliminated at least some of his girth, but clearly he had chosen not to. The choice was a bold statement, and his side made him an imposing figure. When he saw Faraday, he excused himself from his current conversation and made his way toward him. Honorable Scythe Faraday, always a pleasure to see you. He used both his hands to grip Faraday in what was meant to be a heartfelt greeting, but felt forced and artificial. Citra, Rowan, I'd like you to meet High Blade Xenocrates, Faraday said, then turned back to the large man. These are my new apprentices. He took a moment to appraise them. A double apprenticeship? He said jovially. I believe that's a first. Most Scythes have trouble with just one. The better of the two shall receive my blessing for the ring, and the other, said the High Blade, will be surely disappointed, I'm sure. Then he moved on to greet other Scythes that were just now coming in from the rain. See, Rowan said, and you were worried. But to Citra, nothing about the man seemed sincere. Rowan was nervous. He just didn't want to admit it. He knew admitting it would make Citra more worried, which would make him more worried. So he bit back his fears and misgivings and kept his eyes and ears open, taking in everything that happened around him. There were other apprentices there. He overheard too, talking about how this was the big day. A boy and a girl, both older than him, maybe 18 or 19, would be getting their rings today and becoming junior Scythes. The girl lamented about how for the first 4 years they would have to get approval from the selection committee for their gleanings. Every single one, she complained, like we're babies. At least the apprenticeship isn't 4 years long, Rowan interjected, as a way to get into the conversation. The two looked at him with mild disgust. I mean, it takes 4 years to get a college degree, right? Rowan knew he was just digging himself deeper, but he had already committed. At least it doesn't take that long to get a license to glean. Who the hell are you? The girl asked. Ignore him. He's just a spat. A what? Rowan had been called many things, but never that. They both smirked at him. Don't you know anything? Said the girl. Spat, as in spatula? It's what they call new apprentices because you're not good for anything but flipping your Scythe's burgers. Rowan laughed at that, which just irritated them. Then Citra came up next to him. So for spatulas, what does that make you? Safety scissors? Or are you just a couple of tools? The boy looked like he might slug Citra. Who's your mentor, Scythe? He asked her. You should be told of his disrespect. I am, said Faraday, putting his hand on Citra's shoulder. And you don't warrant anyone's respect until after you receive your ring. The boy strained to shrink by about 3 inches. Honorable Scythe Faraday, I'm sorry, I didn't know. The girl took a step away as if to distance herself from him. Best of luck today, he told them with a magnanimous gesture that they didn't deserve. Thank you, said the girl, but if I may say, luck plays no part. We've both trained long and have been taught well by our Scythes. Very true, Faraday said. They nodded respectful goodbyes that bordered on bows and left. After they were gone, Faraday turned to Rowan and Citra. The girl will get her ring today, he said. The boy will be denied. How do you know? Said Rowan. I have friends on the Bejewelling Committee. The boy is smart, but too quick to anger. It's a fatal flaw that cannot be tolerated. As annoying as Rowan found the kid, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. What happens to the apprentices that get denied? They are returned to their families to take up life where they left off. But life can never be the same after a year of training to be a scythe, Rowan pointed out. True, said Faraday, but only good can come from a keen understanding of what it takes to be a scythe. Rowan nodded, but thought for a man of such wisdom that seemed very naive. Scythe training was a scarring endeavor. Purposefully so, but it was scarring nonetheless. The rotunda became increasingly crowded with scythes, and the marble walls, floor, and dome made the voices echo into cacophony. Rowan tried to hear more individual conversations, but they were lost in the din. Faraday had told them that the great bronze doors to the assembly room would open promptly at 7 a.m., and the scythes would be dismissed at the stroke of 7 p.m. 12 hours to accomplish any and all business. Anything left undone would have to wait 4 months until the next conclave. In the early days, Scythe Faraday told them as the doors opened to admit the throng, a conclave would last 3 or 4 days, but they discovered that after the first day, it became little more than arguments and posturing. There's still plenty of that, but it's curtailed. It behooves us all to move through the agenda quickly. The chamber was a huge semicircle with a large wooden rostrum at the front, where the high blade sat, and slightly lower seats on either side. And slightly lower seats on either side for the conclave clerk, who kept records. And slightly lower seats on either side for the conclave clerk, who kept records, and the parliamentarian, who interpreted rules and procedures if any questions arose. Scythe Faraday had told them enough about the power structure of the scythedom for Rowan to know that much. The first order of business, once everyone was settled, was the tolling of the names. One by one, in no particular order, the scythes came to the front to recite the various names of people they had gleaned over the past 4 months. We can't recite them all, Scythe Faraday told them. With over 300 scythes, it would be more than 26,000 names. We are to choose 10. The ones we most remember, the ones who died most valiantly, the ones whose lives were most notable. After each name spoken, an iron bell was rung, solemn and resonant. Rowan was pleased to hear Scythe Faraday reciting Cole Whitlock's name as one of his chosen 10. The tolling of the names got old very quickly for Citra. Even reduced to 10 names each, the recitation lasted for almost 2 hours. It was noble that the scythe saw fit to pay homage to the Glean, but if they only had 12 hours to complete 3 months worth of business, she didn't see the sense of it. There was no written agenda, so there was no way for her and Rowan to know what came next, and Scythe Faraday only explained things as they happened. When is our test? Will we be taken somewhere else for it? Citra asked, but Faraday shushed her. After the tolling of the names, the next order of business was the ceremonial washing of the hands. The scythes all rose and lined up before 2 basins, one on either side of the rostrum. Again, Citra didn't see the point. All this ritual? It's like something you'd see in a tone cold, she said when Scythe Faraday returned, his hands still damp. Faraday leaned over to her and whispered, "Don't let any of the other scythes hear you say that. Do you feel clean after sticking your hands in water that 100 other hands have been in?" Faraday sighed. "It brings solace. It binds us as a community. Do not belittle our traditions because one day they may be yours." "Or not," goaded Rowan. Citra shifted uncomfortably and grumbled. "It just seems like a waste of time." Faraday must have known her real gripe was with not knowing when they would be presented to the conclave and taken away for their test. Citra was not a girl who could endure being in the dark for long. Perhaps that's why Faraday made sure that she was. He was constantly poking at their weaknesses. Next, a number of scythes were singled out for showing bias in their gleanings. This held some interest for Citra and gave her some insight as to how it all worked behind the scenes. One scythe had gleaned too few wealthy people. She was reprimanded and assigned to only glean the rich between now and the next conclave. Another scythe was found to have racial ratio issues. High on the Hispanic, low on the African. "It's due to the demographic where I live," he pleaded. "People have a higher percentage of Hispanic in their personal ratios." Highblade Xenocrates was not swayed. "Then cast a wider net," he said. "Glean elsewhere." He was charged with bringing his ratios back into line or face being disciplined, which consisted of having future gleanings pre-approved by the selection committee. Having one's freedom to glean taken away was a humiliation that no scythe wanted. 16 scythes were taken to task, 10 were warned, 6 were disciplined. The oddest situation was a scythe who was far too pretty for his own good. He got called out for gleaning too many unattractive people. "What an idea!" one of the other scythes shouted out. "Imagine what a world it would be if we only gleaned ugly people." That brought a round of laughter from the rest of the room. The scythe tried to defend himself, claiming that old adage, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," but the high blade wasn't buying it. This was apparently his third such offense, so he was given permanent probation. He could live as a scythe, but could not glean until the next reptilian year. "That's crazy," Citra commented just loud enough for Rowan and Faraday to hear. "No one knows what animal's future years will be named after. I mean, the last reptilian year was the year of the gecko, and that was before I was born." "Precisely," said Faraday with a little bit of guilty glee, which means his punishment could end next year, or never. Now he'll spend his time lobbying the office of the Calendaria to name a year after the skink, or Gila monster, or some other reptile that has not been used. Before they moved on from the disciplinary portion of the morning, there was one more scythe to be called out. It wasn't a matter of bias, however. "I have before me an anonymous note," the Highblade said, "which accuses Honorable Scythe Goddard of maleficence." A rumble throughout the room. Citra saw Scythe Goddard whisper to his inner circle of companions, then stood. "Of what sort of maleficence am I being accused?" "Unnecessary cruelty in your gleaning." "And yet, this accusation comes anonymously," said Goddard. "I cannot believe that a fellow scythe would show such cowardice. I demand the accuser reveal his or herself." More rumbles around the room. No one stood up. No one took responsibility. "Well then," said Goddard, "I refuse to answer to an invisible accuser." Citra expected Highblade Xenocrates to press the issue. After all, an accusation from a fellow scythe should be taken seriously. But the Highblade put the paper down and said, "Well, if there is nothing more, we'll take our mid-morning break." And the scythes, Earth, grand bringers of death, began to fill out of the rotunda for donuts and coffee. Once they were in the rotunda, Faraday leaned close to Citra and Rowan and said, "There was no anonymous accuser. I'm sure that Scythe Goddard accused himself." "Why would he do that?" asked Citra. "To take the steam out of his enemies. It's the oldest trick in the book. Now anyone who accuses him will be assumed to be a cowardly, anonymous accuser. No one will go after him now." Rowan found himself less interested in the stagecraft and parrying with the assembly room as he was the things that went on outside of it. He was already getting a feeling for the scythedom and how it truly worked. The most important business did not occur within the bronze doors, but in the rotunda and dim alcoves of the building, of which there were many, probably for this exact purpose. The early morning conversations had been just small talk, but now, as the day progressed, Rowan could see a small number of scythes congregating during break into small clashes, doing side deals, building alliances, pushing secret agendas. He overheard one group that was planning to propose a ban on remote detonators as a method of gleaning, not for any ethical reason, but because the gun lobby had made a sizable contribution to a particular scythe. Another group was trying to groom one of the younger scythes for a position on the selection committee, so that he might sway gleaning choices when they needed those choices swayed. Power politics might have been a thing of the past, elsewhere, but it was alive and seething in the scythedom. Their mentor did not join any of the plotters. Faraday remained solitary and above petty politics, as did perhaps half of the scythes. "We know the schemes of the schemers," he told Rowan and Citra as he negotiated a daily donut. "They only get their way when the rest of us want them to." Rowan made a point to observe Scythe Goddard. Many scythes approached him to talk. Others grumbled about him under their breath. His entourage of junior scythes were a multicultural bunch in the old school meaning of the word. While no one had pristine ethnogenetics anymore, his inner circle showed traits that leaned toward one ethnos or another. The girl in green seemed mildly Pan-Asian. The man in yellow had African leanings. The one in fiery orange was as Caucasoid as could be, and he himself leaned slightly toward the Hispanic. He was clearly a scythe who wanted high visibility. Even his grand gesture of ethnic balance was a visible one. Although Goddard never turned to look, Rowan had a distinct feeling that he knew Rowan was watching him. For the rest of the morning, proposals were made and hotly debated in the assembly room. As Scythe Faraday had said, the schemers only prevailed when the more high-minded body of the scythedom allowed. The ban on remote detonators was adopted, not because of the bribes from the gun lobby, but because blowing people up was determined to be crude, cruel, and beneath the Scythedom. And the young Scythe put forth for membership on the selection committee was voted down, because no one on that committee should be in anyone's pocket. I should like to be on the Scythe committee one day, Rowan said. Citra looked at him oddly. Why are you talking like Faraday? Rowan shrugged. When in Rome. We're not in Rome, she reminded him. If we were, we'd have a much cooler place for conclave. Local restaurants vied for the chance to cater the conclave, so lunch was a buffet out in the rotunda, even more sumptuous than the one at breakfast. And Faraday packed his plate, which was out of character for him. Don't think ill of him, Scythe Curie told Rowan and Citra, her voice mellifluous, yet sharp at the same time. For those of us who take our vow of austerity seriously, conclave is the only time we allow ourselves the luxury of fine food and drink. It reminds us that we're human. Citra, who had a one-track mind, took this as her opportunity to get information. When will the apprentices be tested? She asked. Scythe Curie smiled and brushed back her silky silvery hair. The ones who were hoping to receive the ring today were tested last night. As for all the others, you will be tested soon enough, she said. Citra's frustration made Rowan snicker, which earned him a glare from Citra. Just shut up and stuff your face, she said. Rowan was happy to oblige. As forced as Citra was on the upcoming test, she began to wonder what in conclave she would miss when the apprentices were taken for testing. Like Rowan, she found conclave to be an education like none other. There were few people beyond Scythes and their apprentices who ever witnessed this, and those others who did caught only a glimpse, such as the string of salespeople after lunch, who were each given 10 minutes to expound the virtues of some weapon or poison they were trying to sell to the Scythedom, and more importantly, the weapon master, who had the final decision over what the Scythedom purchased. They sounded like those awful people on info holograms. It dices, it slices, but wait, there's more. One salesperson was selling a digital poison that would turn the healing nanites into a person's bloodstream into hungry little bastards that would devour their victims from the inside out in less than a minute. He actually used the word victim, which immediately soured the Scythes. He was flatly dismissed by the weapons master. The most successful salesperson was offering a product called Touch of Quietude, which sounded more like a feminine hygiene product than death delivery system. The woman selling it displayed a small pill, but not to give it to the subject. The pill was for the Scythe. Take with water, and within seconds your fingers will secrete a transdermal poison. Anyone you touch for the next hour will be instantly and painlessly gleaned. The weapons master was so impressed he came up to the stage to take a dose, then, in the ultimate demonstration, proceeded to glean the saleswoman. She sold 50 vials of the stuff to the Scythedom posthumously. The rest of the afternoon consisted of more discussion arguments, and votes about policy. Scythe Faraday only found fit to voice his opinion once, when it came to forming an immunity committee. It seems clear to me that there should be an oversight for such granting of immunity, just as the selection committee provides the oversight for gleaning. Rowan and Citra were pleased to see that his opinion carried a great deal of weight. Several Scythes who had initially voted against the forming of an immunity committee switched their vote. However, before a final tally was taken, Highblades Noctis announced that time had run out for the legislative issues. The subject will be at the top of our agenda for the next conclave, he announced. A number of Scythes applauded, but several rose up and shouted their grievous discontent at the issue being tabled. Scythe Faraday did not voice his own displeasure. He took a long breath in and out. Interesting, is all he said. This might have all pinged loudly on Rowan and Citra's radar had the Highblade not immediately announced that the next order of business was the apprentices. Citra found herself wanting to grip Rowan's hand in anticipation and squeeze it until it was bloodless, but she restrained herself. Rowan, on the other hand, followed his mentor's lead. He took a deep breath in, then out, and tried to let his anxiety wash from him. He had studied all he could study, learned all he could learn. He would do the best he could. If he failed today, there would be more than enough chances to redeem himself. Good luck, Rowan said to Citra. You too, she returned. Let's make Scythe Faraday proud. Rowan smiled and thought that Faraday might smile at Citra as well, but he didn't. He just kept his gaze on Xenocrates. First, the candidates for Scythedom were called up. There were 4 whose apprenticeship was now complete, having had their final test the evening before. There was nothing left but to ordain them, or not, as the case may be. Word was there was a 5th candidate who had failed the final test last night. He or she wasn't even invited to conclave. 3 rings were brought out, resting on the red velvet pillows. The 4 looked to one another, now aware that even though they had passed their final test, one of them would not be ordained and would be sent home in shame. Scythe Faraday turned to the Scythe beside him and said, Only one Scythe cleaned himself since the last conclave, and yet 3 are being confirmed today? Has the population grown so drastically in 3 months that we need 2 additional Scythes? The 3 chosen apprentices were called one by Scythe Mandela, who presided over the bajillion committee. As each knelt before him, he said something about each of them in turn, and then handed them their rings, which they slipped on their fingers and held to show the conclave, which responded for each of them with obligatory applause. Then they announced their patron historic, the luminary from history whom they would name themselves after. The conclave applauded with each announcement accepting Scythe Goodall, Schrödinger, and Colbert into the Mid-American Scythedom. When the 3 had left the stage, the hot-tempered boy remained, just as Scythe Faraday had said earlier in the day. He stood alone after the applause died down. Then Scythe Mandela said, Ransom Palladini, we have chosen not to ordain you as a Scythe. Wherever life leads you, we wish you well. You are dismissed. He lingered for a few moments as if thinking it might be a joke, or maybe one final test. Then his lips pursed, his face turned red, and he strode quickly up the center aisle in silence, pushing through the heavy bronze doors, their hinges complaining at his exit. How awful, said Citra. At least I could applaud him for trying. There are no accolades for the unworthy, Faraday said. One of us will exit that way, Rowan pointed out to her. He resolved that if it was him, he would take his time going down that aisle. He'd make eye contact and nod to as many Scythes as he could on his way out. Were he to be ejected, he would leave that final conclave with dignity. The remaining apprentices may now come forward, said Xenocrates. Rowan and Citra rose, ready to face whatever the Scythedom had in store for them. Journal entry. I do believe people still fear death, but only 1/100th as much as they used to. I say that because based on the current quotas, a person's chance of being gleaned within the next 100 years is only 1%, which means that the chance that a child born today will be gleaned between now and their 5,000th year on Earth is only 50%. Of course, since we no longer count the years numerically, aside from children and adolescents, no one knows how old anyone is anymore, sometimes not even themselves. These days, people roughly know within a decade or two. At the writing of this, I can tell you that I am somewhere between 160 and 180 years old. Although, I don't enjoy looking my age. Like everyone else, I turn the corner on occasion and set my biological age back substantially. But like many Scythes, I don't set it back past the age of 40. Only Scythes that are actually young like to look young. To date, the oldest living human being is somewhere around 300, but only because we are still so close to the age of mortality. I wonder what life will be like a millennium from now, when the average age will be nearer to 1,000. Will we all be Renaissance children, skilled at every art and science because we've had time to master them? Or will boredom and slavish routine plague us even more than it does today, giving us less of a reason to live limitless lives? I dream of the former, but suspect the latter. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 14. A Slight Stipulation. Rowan stepped on Citra's toes on his way to the aisle. She grunted slightly, but didn't wisecrack about it. That was because Citra was too busy going over weapons and poisons in her head. Rowan's clumsiness was the least of her concerns. She thought they would be led to a room elsewhere in the building, a quiet place for their exam. But other apprentices, who had been to a conclave before, were heading down the aisle, toward the open space in front of the rostrum. They lined up in what seemed like no particular order, facing the conclave like a chorus line. So Citra joined the line next to Rowan. What is this? She whispered. Not sure, he whispered back. There were 8 in total. Some stood with hard expressions and control of their emotions. Others were trying not to look terrified. Citra wasn't sure what image she projected, and found herself annoyed that Rowan looked
Hello? Hello?
Can someone get this? Thank you.
Smoke speed?
Help! Enemy removed.
Flash!
Help!
Rainer's down. Enemy spotted mid.
Weapon here.
Enemy spotted B. Reloading.
Ah! What? Careful
One
now.
enemy remaining. Spike down mid.
Don't worry. Your life won't go to waste.
Remember, stay out of the fire. Super high level tactic. Remember that, yeah? Careful now. Neutralize.
Spike planted.
Cutting their vision. Finished. Cutting their vision.
One enemy remaining. Last player standing. Clutch.
Viper. Must you
Just
always
casual, as if you were
play
waiting for a
with
bus.
your food?
Honorable Scythe Curie will be the examiner today, Zamafri said. A hush fell over the chamber as Scythe Curie, the grand dame of death, came forward. She walked down the line of apprentices twice, sizing them up. Then she said, each of you will be asked one question. You will have one opportunity to give an acceptable answer. One question? What kind of exam could possibly consist of one question? How could they test anyone's knowledge that way? Citra's heart beat so violently she imagined it bursting out of her chest. Then, she would find herself waking up in a revival center tomorrow, a laughingstock. Scythe Curie began at the left end of the line. It meant Citra would be fourth to be questioned. Jackery Zimmerman, Scythe Curie said to the gangly boy in the end. A woman hurls herself on your blade, offering herself as sacrifice to prevent you from gleaning her child, and dies. What do? The boy hesitated for just an instant, then said, by resisting the gleaning, she has violated the third commandment. I therefore am obliged to glean the rest of her family. Scythe Curie was silent for a moment, then said, not an acceptable answer. But, said Jackery, she resisted. The rule says if one resists one's own gleaning. Were she the chosen one, the third commandment would most certainly apply. But if we are ever unsure, we are obliged to err on the side of compassion. In this case, you would glean the child and arrange for the woman to be brought to a revival center, granting her a year of immunity along with the rest of her family. Then, she gestured toward the assembly. Step down. Your sponsoring scythe will choose your punishment. Citra swallowed. Shouldn't the punishment for failure be the awful acknowledgement of that failure? What sort of punishment would Scythe devise for...
107.
Weapon here.
Last player standing. Spike planted.
Suffers half.
If you must fall, then fall near me. Scanning ahead.
Come on, let's go! Put down. Careful now.
In sight.
101 on ramp.
Shot down. Revealing area.
Spike planted.
Shock dart. Shock dart.
Last player standing.
Down.
One enemy remaining.
3 gone.
The symphony of death. I'm poor. Get used to it.
For their disgraced disciples, Scythe Curie moved on to a strong-looking girl with high cheekbones on a face that looked like it could weather a hurricane. Claudette Catalino, Scythe Curie said. You have made a mistake in your poison. That would never happen, Claudette said. Do not interrupt me. But your premise is flawed, Honorable Scythe Curie. I know my poison so well, I could never make a mistake. Ever. Well, said Curie with deadpan irony, how proud your sponsoring site must be to have the first perfect pupil in human history. It brought forth a smattering of chuckles from the room. All right then, continued Scythe Curie. Let us say that someone irritated by your arrogance has sabotaged your poison. Your subject, a man who offers you no resistance, begins to convulse, and it appears that his end will be slow and likely filled with much more pain than his nanites can suppress. What do you do? And without hesitation, Claudette said, I draw the pistol that I always keep for emergencies and end the subject's suffering with a single well-placed bullet. But first, I would order any family members to leave the room, sparing them the trauma of witnessing a ballistic bleeding. Scythe Curie raised her eyebrows, considering the response, and said, acceptable, and thinking of the family is a nice touch, even in a hypothetical. Then she grinned. I am disappointed I couldn't prove you imperfect.
Enemy spotted B.
Next was a boy whose gaze was fixed on a spot in the back wall, clearly trying to find his happy place. Noah Zabarski, said Curie. Yes, Your Honor. His voice quivered. Citra wondered what sort of response that might evoke from Curie. What sort of question might she ask a boy so frightened? Name for me 5 species that generate neurotoxin powerful enough to be effective on a poison-tipped dart. The boy, who had been holding his breath, exhaled without
enemy
reading.
remaining.
Well, Phylobates. Phylobates are Ratinia, of course, better known as the poison dart frog, he said. The blue-ringed octopus, the marbled cone snail, the inland taipan snake, and, the deathstalker scorpion. Excellent, Scythe Curie said. Can you name any more? Yes, Noah told her, but you said one question. And what if I tell you, I've changed my mind and I want 6 instead of 5? Noah took a deep breath, but
You man ready for a light show? Here. Help.
Right here.
We got it this time. Watch your eyes. Embarrassed.
I know exactly where you are. Still in sight.
There they are.
Enemy
didn't hold
spotted A.
it, then I would tell you, in a most respectful way, that you are not honoring your word, and a Scythe is duty-bound to honor their word. Scythe Curie smiled. Acceptable answer. Very good. And then moved on to Citra. Citra Terranova. She had realized the Scythe knew everyone's name, and yet it came as a shock to hear her say it. Yes, Honorable Scythe Curie. The woman leaned in close, peering deeply into Citra's eyes. What is the worst thing you have ever done? Citra was prepared for just about any question but that one. Excuse me? It's a simple question, dear. What is the worst thing you've ever done? Citra's jaw clenched. Her mouth went dry. She knew the answer. She didn't have to think about it.
Help!
Can I have a moment? Take your time. Then, some random Scythe in the audience
Spike
heckled.
planted.
She's done so many terrible things, she's having trouble selecting just one. Laughter everywhere. In that moment, she hated them all. Citra held eye contact with Scythe Curie. Those all-seeing gray eyes. She knew she couldn't back away from the question. When I was 8, she began, I tripped a girl down the stairs. She broke her neck and had to spend 3 days at a revival center. I never told her that it was me. That's the worst thing I ever did. Scythe Curie nodded and offered a sympathetic grin, then said, You're lying, dear. She turned to the crowd, shaking her head perhaps a little bit sadly. Unacceptable answer. Then she turned back to Citra. Step down, she said. Scythe Faraday will choose your punishment. She didn't argue. She didn't insist that she was telling the truth because
Stay alive. want their life, not yours.
Dead! My ultimate's ready.
Spike planted.
Watch your eyes! Come on, let's go!
Last player standing.
Here. Here. Here.
Look sharp!
Enemy spotted A.
Scout's down.
Defeated.
One enemy remaining.
Stay taut as a bowstring. The fight commences.
Need a drop.
Can you buy Sage?
Thank you. Together.
Careful now. Flash! Rain is down.
Spike planted.
I know exactly where.
One enemy remaining.
Hop off. Are you SSL?
Huh?
Are you like SSL?
I don't know what that means.
Stand tall. We are Valorant. We are fighters.
Smoke side.
Nowhere to run!
No more. My
Spike planted.
Careful now. Watch your eyes.
One enemy remaining.
He's low. Thanks.
Wait is over. Standing ahead.
I'm the last thing they'll see before they die.
I need a drop. Cheers.
Got you.
Here.
People ahead.
Eliminated. You fought well.
One enemy remaining.
3 down.
Spike is mid.
Last round in the half.
Don't be cheap.
Careful now. Going up.
Exactly where you
Enemy spotted. Right here.
Get out of my way! Your duty is not over!
I must record this feeling.
Reloading.
Spike planted. Last player standing.
Because she wasn't. She had no idea how Scythe Fury knew. Citra went back to her place, unable to look at Scythe Faraday, and he said nothing to her. Then Scythe Fury moved on his own, seemed so slow. Citra just wanted to hit him. Rowan Danish, Scythe Fury asked, "What do you fear? What do you fear above all else?" Rowan did not hesitate in his response. He shrugged and said, "I don't fear
Switching
anything."
sides.
Citra wasn't sure she heard him right. Did he just say he didn't fear anything? Had he lost his mind? Perhaps you want to take some more time before answering, Scythe Fury prompted, but Rowan just shook his head. "I don't need any more time. That's my answer. Not going to change it." Absolute silence in the room. Citra found herself involuntarily shaking her head, and then she realized he was doing this for her, so she wouldn't have to suffer alone through whatever punishment was in store. So she wouldn't feel she had fallen behind him. Although she still wanted to smack him, now it was for an entirely different reason. "So," said Scythe Fury, "today we have one perfect apprentice and one fearless one." She sighed, "But I'm afraid that no one is entirely fearless, so your answer, as I'm sure you must know, is unacceptable." She waited, perhaps thinking Rowan might respond to that, but he did not. He just waited for her to say, "Step down. Scythe Faraday will choose your punishment." Rowan returned to his place next to Citra as nonchalant as could be. "You're an idiot," she whispered to him. He gave her the same shrug he gave Scythe Fury. "Guess so."
Enemy spotted B.
Cypher setup is here.
Our spike carrier's down.
Spike down.
Sorry, bro.
You're nothing.
On my way. Got him.
Enemy remaining.
Here.
It's young broom. He was nest. What?
Watch your eyes. Go ahead.
Sage, are you in the toilet?
What?
Deep breaths.
Are you in the toilet?
Are founding.
Oh no, my mic was back. Thanks for asking.
Imagine hearing it in double.
You shut up.
There they are. Enemy dead. Spotted B. Enemy down. Many enemies at the
One enemy remaining.
Careful now.
Flawless.
I'll outshine all their radius. On my way. Going up. Ready.
Help. Enemy remaining. Last player standing.
This is crazy. It feels like we've been doing this forever. Anyone else feel like that? Just me?
Here.
You think I don't know why you did that? Maybe I did it so that I'll look better at the next conclave. Maybe if I gave too good an answer today, my next question would be harder. But Citra knew it was false, faulty logic. Rowan didn't think that way, and then Scythe Faraday spoke up, his voice quiet and measured, but somehow carrying an intensity that was chilling. You shouldn't have done that. I'll accept whatever punishment you see fit, Rowan said.
Enemy here. Enemy down.
here. Right here.
Spike here.
It's not about the punishment, he snapped. But now, Scythe 3 had questioned a few more apprentices. One who was sent to sit, 2 others stayed. Maybe Scythe 3 will see what I did as noble, Rowan suggested. Yes, and so will everyone else, Faraday said. Motives can easily be beaten into weapons. Which proves, Citra said to Rowan, that you're an idiot. But he only grinned, idiotico. She thought she had the last word on the matter, and that it was over until they returned home, where no doubt Scythe Faraday would inflict some annoying but fair punishment that fit the crime. She was mistaken. After the apprentices were done being traumatized, the focus of the Scythe began to wear down. There was now a constant murmur as Scythe discussed dinner plans as the hour approached 7. The remaining business was of little interest to anyone. Issues of building maintenance, and whether or not Scythe should be required to announce the turning of a corner, so it wasn't so shocking when they looked 30 years younger at the next conclave. It was as things were wrapping up that one Scythe stood up and loudly addressed Xenocrates. She was the one dressed in green, with emeralds embroidered into her robe. One of Scythe's Goddard's punch. Excuse me, Your Excellency, she began, although clearly she was speaking to the entire assembly, not just the High Blade. I'm finding myself troubled by this set of new apprentices, more specifically the apprentices taken on by Honorable Scythe Faraday. Both Citra and Rowan looked up. Faraday did not. He seemed frozen, looking downward almost in meditation, or perhaps steeling himself for what is to come. To the best of my knowledge, a Scythe has never taken on 2 apprentices and set them in competition for the ring, she continued. Xenocrates looked over the parliamentarian, who had jurisdiction in such matters. There is no law against it, Scythrand, said the parliamentarian. Yes, Scythrand continued, but clearly the competition has turned into camaraderie. How will we ever know which is the better candidate if they continue to aid each other? Your complaint is duly noted, said Xenocrates, but Scythrand was not done. I propose that to ensure this competition is truly competition, we add a slight stipulation. Scythe Faraday rose to his feet, as if launched from his chair. I object, he shouted. This conclave cannot stipulate how I train my apprentices. It is my sole right to teach them, train them, and discipline them. Rand held up her hands in a gesture of mock magnanimity. I merely seek to make your ultimate choice fair and honest. Do you think you can beguile this conclave with your baubles and vanity? We are not so base as to be dazzled by shiny things. What is your proposal, Scythrand? Asked Xenocrates. I object, shouted Faraday. You can't object to something she has not yet said. Faraday bit down his objection and waited. Citra watched, feeling almost detached, as if there were a tennis match and it was match point. But she wasn't an observer, was she? She was the ball, and so was Rowan. I propose, said Scythrand, with the slickness of a Deathstalker scorpion, that upon the confirmation of the winner, the first order of business will be for that winner to glean the loser. Gasps and grumbles from around the room, and Citra couldn't believe it.
Nowhere to run! I know
We
exactly.
rotate, guys. We rotate.
Have an open vein.
It's on the right side.
Player standing.
I know what must be done.
Some laughter and affirmations as well. She wanted to believe the woman in green could not be serious. That this was yet another level of the test. Faraday was so beside himself he said nothing at first. He couldn't even find the words to object. Finally, he thundered his fury like a force of nature, a wave pounding the shore. This flies in the face of everything we are, everything we do. We are in the business of gleaning, but you and Scythe Goddard and all of his disciples, you would turn this into a blood sport. Nonsense, said Rand. It makes perfect sense. The threat of gleaning will ensure that the best applicant comes out on
Yes,
top.
up.
And then, rather than striking it down as ridiculousness to Citra's horror, Xenocrates turned to the parliamentarian. Is there a rule against it? The parliamentarian considered and said, since there is no precedent for the treatment of a double apprenticeship, there are no rules as to how it should be dealt with. The proposal is within our guidelines. Guidelines? Shouted Scythe Faraday. Guidelines? The moral fabric of the Scythe should be our guidelines. To even consider this is barbaric. Oh, please, said Xenocrates with an exasperated sweep of his hand. Spare us all the melodrama, Faraday. This is, after all, the consequence of your decision to take 2 apprentices, when 1 would have been sufficient. Then the clock began to strike 7 o'clock. I demand a full debate and vote on this, but the 3 bells had already rung, and Xenocrates ignored him. As is my prerogative as High Blade, I so stipulate that in the matter of Rowan Danish and Citra Terra Nova, whomsoever shall prevail will be required to glean the other on receipt of his or her
What's in
ring.
mid?
Then he banged his gavel heavily upon the rostrum, adjoining conclave and sealing their fate.
Not really.
Journal entry.
He's CT.
There are
Nice.
times I long for a relationship with the Thunderhead. I suppose we always want what we can't have. Others can call on the Thunderhead for advice, ask it to resolve disputes. Some rely on it as a confidant, for it's known to have a compassionate, impartial ear and never gossips. The Thunderhead is the world's best listener, but not precise. For us, the Thunderhead is eternally silent. We have full access to its wealth of knowledge, of course. The Scythe uses the Thunderhead for countless tasks. But to us, it's simply a database, a tool, nothing more. As an entity, as a mind, the Thunderhead does not exist for us. And yet it does, and we know it. Estrangement from the collective consciousness of humanity's wisdom is just one more thing that sets Scythe apart from others. The Thunderhead must see us. It must be aware of the Scythe's petty bickering and growing corruption, even though it has pledged non-interference. Does it despise us, Scythe, but abides us because it has to? Or does it simply choose not to think of us at all? And which is worse, to be despised or to be ignored? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 15. The Space Between. The night was bleak, and rain streaked the windows of the train, destroying the lights beyond, until the lights were gone. Rowan knew they were slicing through the countryside now, but the darkness could have been the airless expanse of space. I won't do it, Citra finally said, breaking the silence that had engulfed them since leaving Conclave. They can't make me do it. Faraday didn't say a word, didn't even look at her. So Rowan took it upon himself to answer, yes, they can. Finally, Faraday looked at them. Rowan was right, he said. They will find whatever button will make you dance, and dance you will.
In front of you guys. On Spike, probably.
Now Wendy's.
Nice, GG's.
GG's.
DD.
You just have to go one.
GG's. Yeah, we'll run it back. We'll run it back for the one time. For the one time intense. For the one time intense.
Match found.
For the one time intense. I don't wanna hear. I hate that. I don't wanna get close. I haven't been as A as I lost my hoe. I haven't been as A as I lost my bros. Sippington City. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
No matter how hideous the tune. Citra kicked the empty seat in front of her. How could they be so awful? And why do they hate us so much? It's not all of them, Rowan said, and I don't think it's really about us. Clearly, Faraday was a respected Scythe, and although he didn't come out against Goddard today, his feelings about the man were clear. Goddard must see Faraday as a threat. Attacking Rowan and Citra was a warning shot. What if we both fail? Citra suggested. If we're lousy apprentices, then they can't choose either of us. And yet they will. Faraday told her with an authority and finality that left little room for doubt. No matter how poorly you perform, they will still choose one of you for the spectacle alone. Then he scowled in disgust, and to set the precedent. I'll bet Goddard has enough friends to make sure it happens, said Rowan. I think he has the High Blade on his side too. Indeed, Faraday said with a war-weary sigh. Never before have there been so many wheels within wheels in a Scythe. Rowan closed his eyes, wishing he could close his mind as well and hide from his own thoughts. In 8 months, I will be killed by Citra, he thought. Or I will kill her. And calling it gleaning didn't change the fact that he cared for Citra, but enough to surrender his life and let her win. Citra certainly wouldn't back down to let him earn the ring. When he opened his eyes, he caught her staring at him. She didn't look away. Rowan, she said, whatever happens, I want you to know. Don't, Rowan told her. Just don't. And the rest of the ride was silence. Citra, who was not the heaviest sleeper, found herself awake all night after they arrived home. Images of the sights she saw constantly filled even the hint of dreams, drawing her back to unwanted wakefulness. The wise ones, the schemers, the compassionate, and those who did not seem to care. Such a delicate charge as pruning the human race should not be subject to the quirks of personality. Scythes were supposed to be above the petty, just as they were above the law. Faraday certainly was. If she became a Scythe, she would follow his lead, and if she didn't become one, it wouldn't matter because she'd be dead. Perhaps there was some sort of twisted wisdom in the decision to have one of them being gained by the other. Whoever wins will begin their life as a Scythe in abject sorrow, never to forget the cost of that ring. Morning came with no great fanfare. It was just an ordinary day like any other. The rain had passed, and the sun peeked from behind the shifting clouds. It was Rowan's turn to make breakfast. Eggs and hash browns. He never cooked the potatoes long enough. Hash pails, Citra always called them. Faraday never complained when the meals they made were subpar. He ate what they served, and didn't tolerate complaints from either of them. The punishment for making something barely eatable was having to eat it yourself. Citra ate, even though she didn't have an appetite. Even though the whole world had slid off its axis. Breakfast was breakfast. How dare it be? When Faraday broke the silence, it felt like a brick flying through the window. I will go out alone today. The two of you will attend to your studies. Yes, said Faraday, Citra said, with Rowan saying the same in a half-second echo. For you, nothing has changed. Citra looked down into her cereal. It was Rowan who dared state the obvious. Everything has changed, sir. And then, Faraday